During the day, in a large tall skyscraper, a man climbed the stairs and breathed tiredly. He was so tired of going up that he thought he was going to die, asking why they didn't warn him that the elevator wasn't working. It was already the 28th floor. He thought that he would not have accepted the order if he had known about it. At that moment, he called the intercom, saying that it was a delivery. The girl who opened the door finally spoke, asking him how long can we wait. The man looked at her in amazement, sweating, and asked what. She furiously snatched the package from him, saying that this restaurant was across the street from here, and she was not going to pay for delivery when he was digging around so much. The man tried to explain to the girl that her elevator was not working, but she just said angrily, "Is he kidding?" She said that the food was already cold, and she knew it. Delivery has been haphazard lately. The man, losing his temper, screamed furiously, "Then why doesn't she lift her fat body from the sofa and go get food herself?" After that, he suddenly came to his senses and shyly apologized to the woman, telling himself to take a deep breath. If she complains about him, they will take away his right to accept orders a few days in advance, asking himself what else does he have left. It is his own fault, because he is very poor. Thinking about this, he was sitting on his scooter when he suddenly saw something and was surprised. Turning his head, he saw something strange and thought again, the gate. In front of him was a huge round substance of blue color, a gate. Several years ago, such gates began to open all over the world. These gates lead to dungeons infested with monsters, a threat that cannot be resisted by human efforts, and then the gods, whom they call mythical, chose several representatives of the human race and endowed them with incredible power. These chosen ones have taken upon themselves the responsibility of fighting the monsters, and these chosen ones are called hunters by people all over the world. The man thought upset. Well, now it will take him forever to get around this. For simple people like him, all this otherworldly topic was nothing more than an eternal headache. Suddenly, someone called him, and when he picked up the phone, the person shouted Hajun. He asked him what he said to the client. The man said that he just got a call from a restaurant and they canceled their services in favor of another delivery company, all because he was rude to the customer. He said that he already had enough problems, and Hajun thought about the restaurant. He worriedly thought about that, but the person on the phone told him that he was now banned from orders for a week, asking if he understood. Hajun said in fear, "But boss." The caller hung up after sending him a message about the buyer's comments about their work, which attached a photo of food in the toilet and wrote that he lives across the street from this restaurant and the delivery took more than half an hour. The food arrived cold and all the other snacks were soggy, so I had to send it all into the toilet. Hajun angrily decided that he would now explain everything to the boss, but suddenly he screamed, holding his head in his hands. He realized that next week he needed to pay rent and he would have to work as a mover. He asked why the mythical ones didn't choose him and give him a gift like these hunters. If he were a hunter, he would now be living luxuriously and comfortably. With these thoughts, he decided that he would go home, when suddenly he heard some sound and wondered in surprise where the sound of the harp was coming from. At that moment, he received a message on his phone that he had a new order for delivery. Hajun looked at it in surprise and thought, "What is this?" He's never seen an app like this. What kind of notification is this? The notification said that he had a new order for delivery. Suddenly, at that moment, a bright pink color began to come from the phone. The light enveloped Hajun and suddenly, he closed his eyes, then opened them and found himself in a very strange place. There were pink clouds around him, and in front of him was a huge pink castle with flying unicorns. Hajun was near the gate, still sitting on his scooter and looking at it in amazement, wondering where he was. Is this a dream, or was it chosen by the gods? After crying, he thought that he could finally get out of the slums and no longer work as a courier. Suddenly, he again received a message that he had a new delivery order. Picking up the phone, Hajun saw that one bottle of nectar had been ordered and a route had been set. He thought in surprise, this is a delivery app. He couldn't understand what kind of nectar it was and what he needed to deliver, but he thought, maybe he can take it and see. Clicking accept, a large pink gate opened in front of him, and he rode his scooter through it. In front of him was a huge luxurious pink castle. According to the map, this is here. Hajun thought incredibly, this is the abode of the gods. He looked around in surprise and, looking ahead, thought, wow, should he pick up the order here? knocking on the huge pink gate. He thought if he met someone from the mythical, he might have a chance to become a hunter. On the other side of the door, a man asked him who was there. A beautiful girl with long blonde hair and a long dress opened the door for him. The man greeted her in front of her, trying to explain why he came. But the girl exclaimed, "He's a man. What does a mortal do on Olympus?" She told him to explain himself now, asking how he could get here. Ha-jun showed her the phone with the delivery application, saying that he himself would like to know. He had a strange application and order for it. The girl said thoughtfully, "Delivery app?" Immediately she exclaimed, "This fool Hermes." She told him to wait a little. Usually people shouldn't touch such things. At that moment, she handed him a flask with something like a flame inside, telling him to take it. Apparently her brother would make a scandal if he didn't get it to him on time, so she asked him to bring it as quickly as possible and even don't think about uncorking and drinking, asking, "Okay?" The girl told him not to drink a single drop, and Ha-jun said okay in surprise, and the girl gestured to him that she was watching him and abruptly slammed the door. Ha-jun stood amazed and thought, what is going on? He thought that he would no longer be a courier, but even from the gods he receives suspicion and warnings not to touch their food. Looking at the flask, he thought that it just looked like apple juice, asking himself if he could just throw it away. Walking towards the motorcycle, Ha-jun thought that the girl told him that this needed to be delivered to her brother, so he is also God. He decided that if so, then maybe he would agree to become his heavenly patron, and putting on the helmet, he told himself that this was the last delivery in his life. Ha-jun drove along a smoking road with lava visible in the cracks. The app showed him that he was approaching his goal, and he realized that it seemed he would arrive soon. He arrived at a large house standing next to the lava. Ha-jun shouted that the delivery had arrived, thinking to himself how many flights had he covered today. Entering the house, he realized that it was very hot here, like a sauna, thinking where did this heat come from? At that moment, I saw a man hammering something with a huge hammer next to a large stove. Turning around, the plump man asked who was there. Ha-jun, frightened, told him not to think that he was some kind of thief and had a delivery to him. Ha-jun fearfully backed away from him while the man approached him, holding a huge sword in his hands, and then, looking at him, joyfully said it must have been sent by his sister. Hearing this, Ha-jun thought in surprise, are they brother and sister? But they are completely different, maybe not related. The man said thoughtfully, looking at Ha-jun, that only he was not Hermes, asking him, he, a mortal, how did he get here? The man was shocked and pointed his red-hot sword at Ha-jun, when suddenly the frightened man said, he must wait, because his sister asked him to deliver this bottle as soon as possible, after which the man exclaimed, oh. Taking the flask in his hands, the man asked him in surprise, did he really give him everything and never take a sip? He answered him, well, naturally, he's not some petty thief who repels other people's orders, and looking at the man, he told him to quickly take it. He laughed very loudly, holding his stomach, and Ha-jun could not understand what was happening. The man said let him just look at himself, good fellow. He said that one sip of nectar would make him a god. It's hard to believe that he was not at all tempted. Ha-jun was shocked by what he heard. I think, wait. He's saying that this bottle that resembles apple juice can make him a god. Finally, in his hands is something that will help him say goodbye to the life of a delivery man forever. Thinking about this, he looked at the flask, but the man snatched it from Ha-jun's hands, smiling, after which he, in surprise, extended his hand to him. Embarrassed, he wanted to ask to take at least one sip, but at that moment the man drank it all, after catching his breath and saying that he liked to drink it in one sitting. He talked contently about how he had not drunk such fresh nectar for a long time. It seemed that he delivered it without the slightest delay. With these words, the man said that he liked him, saying that his name was Hephaestus. Ha-jun introduced himself in response, and Hephaestus, mispronouncing his name out loud, said that it was a very interesting name, thanking him for his work. He wanted to say that his name was not that, but Hephaestus interrupted him, saying that he had refreshed himself with nectar, and now it was time to get to work, wishing Ha-jun a good journey. He put his hand on his shoulder and said, wait, after which the man looked back in surprise and looked at Ha-jun. Ha-jun told him, laughing, that he did not pay, deciding that he would not leave here empty-handed. Hephaestus asked in surprise, didn't he pay? He asked him, does he mean payment for his delivery? Hephaestus said that Ha-jun should have already received this, laughing, and Ha-jun thought, what does this mean? At that moment, he remembered about the application, looking at the screen, where a very bright light was coming from. He closed his eyes and a window appeared in front of him, where 1,000 points were written. Lying on the sofa and looking at the screen, Ha-jun thought that this was definitely not a dream. He was once again enveloped by that blinding light, and then he returned to Earth again. So he first thought it was a dream, but this notice did not go away. Ha-jung looked at the screen and thought, he doesn't even know where to spend these points. Couldn't he really pay with money? He thought in frustration that he was so close to the gods, and this is all he got. Asking if he was asking too much. It doesn't cost him anything to make him the world's strongest as rank hunter. Thinking about this, Ha-jun suddenly looked at the screen and asked in surprise, huh? He saw a sign that said that glasses could be exchanged for goods in the store, and Ha-jun asked the store in surprise. Having decided that he needed to buy something, he went into the store and saw the goods there, thinking what kind of nonsense is this? The goods included a golden apple, an axe, a lead arrow, a golden arrow, and a moped. Ha-jun thought that he didn't need this. And what kind of moped? The moped was the most expensive and Ha-jun couldn't understand why it was so expensive. There was no equipment for hunters here. Even if he got it, he would not survive even a minute in the dungeon. Ha-jun decided that everything was in vain and he would never become a hunter. At that moment, he saw something amazing and shouted, what is it? He saw that the points could be converted into their money, and one coin was worth 10,000 local currency. Ha-jun thought this is what he is thinking. He touched the screen with his finger, and suddenly a 10,000 bill flew to him, and looking at the screen, he saw that he had 1 less points. Ha-jun was shocked. He couldn't believe this was happening, and pressing the button again and again, his apartment was filled with money. Then he took the money from the floor and, squeezing it in his hand, said madly, this is what he understands is a reward. He couldn't figure out if he was sleeping. Ha-jun sat at the table, happily saying how delicious it was for him. It turned out that the conversion to real money actually worked. He even checked one of the bills at the ATM, and it turned out to be real money. He has 800 points left in his account. That's 10 million won. He received all this in one delivery. The employee of the establishment asked Ha-jun, is everything okay with his dish? He cried while eating, answering the man that everything was incredibly delicious, and suddenly laughing madly. The worker hurriedly left, and Ha-jun was thinking, what will he do with this money? Suddenly he noticed an announcement from the country's best hunters guild, Yongwon, announcing the signing of a contract with Hyun Sung-lin. Ha-young looked at the announcement again in surprise. Having finished reading that with a new member, the guild was preparing for the next raid into Tartarus, one of the most terrible and dangerous dungeons. The heavenly patron of Hyun Sung-lim, according to rumors, is the Olympian god Hephaestus. Ha-jun thought in surprise, ah, Hephaestus. Is this his patron? After that, he thought with a smile that, however, he didn't care about that. For him, Hephaestus was the best client in the world. Later, Ha-jun left the establishment, saying how full he was. At this moment, his phone rang, and he thought that it must be a new order. When he picked it up, he had a good feeling. It's good that he went on a moped. Ha-jun got on the moped and saw a notification that he had an order for me, saying let's go. The light began to fade from the phone again, and Ha-jun closed his eyes, and then, opening them, asked himself where is he? He was in a beautiful large garden with a rainbow and flying butterflies. Ha-jun said in surprise, was he in some kind of garden? He decided to see what he would deliver this time, when suddenly he heard the question behind him, is he Ha-jun? He was very surprised and saw behind him a woman in a long white dress, who told him that she was pleased to meet you. Her name is Demeter. Ha-young greeted her, and Demeter said that her nephew told her that he was a delivery man, after which Ha-young asked her nephew in surprise. She answered yes, his name is Hephaestus. He knows him, Ha-young thought. What a family. It's not clear who stood on whom. Having said that, Hephaestus said that he delivered the nectar very quickly. Demeter said it seems that he can be trusted, and she wants him to deliver something for her. Ha-jun told her that she was not mistaken, and he will deliver whatever she wants because she can rely on him. Ha-jun thought that if this is something like the last order, then this is easy money. She will probably give him some kind of magic wreath. Demeter told him that it was wonderful and told him to wait, starting to cast a spell. Green rays began to emanate from her hands, and suddenly a white box tied with a red bow appeared. Ha-jun looked at it in surprise, and Demeter asked him if he could take this to her daughter. She said that she was sorry that she could not do this herself, but they, the gods, should not leave their abodes without a serious reason. With these words, she handed the box to Ha-jun, and he thought about delivering the box. He decided that it was a no-brainer and said of course he understood. At that moment, Demeter looked at him with sad eyes and everything around became dark. The flowers withered and the sun set. Demeter turned away, and Ha-jun said in surprise, "What?" Turning around, he couldn't understand what it was, why it suddenly became so dark. Did he think something went wrong? Suddenly, a thought occurred to him. What if this is not a simple lunchbox, but a bomb? Afterwards, he thought that he really didn't care. The main thing was that they were paid, and sitting on the scooter, he remembered that she said that it was for her daughter. Then there was definitely nothing dangerous in the box. Ha-jun decided to look where he needed to go, and pressing his finger on the screen, he was suddenly horrified. He began to feel drawn in and couldn't understand what was happening. After some time, he found himself in the real world and wondered in amazement why he returned to Earth. He couldn't figure out what happened to his delivery, but he's now at Noryongjin Station, and he needs to get to Sinchon Station. He thought it couldn't be that Demeter's daughter really lives in South Korea. Ha-jun was amazed to remember that Demeter told him that they, the gods, should not leave their abode without a serious reason, thinking, after all, she said exactly that. So what is her daughter doing in South Korea? Deciding that he would find out about this on the spot, Ha-jun smiled and thought that he had never been so inspired by a new order. He drove down the road and thought, I wonder how much they will pay him this time. He received a message that he was approaching his goal, and he suddenly thought for a minute, this can't be true. He exclaimed that if he had known, he would never have accepted this order, looking forward. In front of him was a huge purple portal, and Ha-jun thought her daughter lives in such a dangerous dungeon of the world. It's not for nothing that this dungeon is called the Hunter's Grave. Hunters die there even better. Ha-jun was sweating from tension. No one knows what lies in the depths of this dungeon. He was terribly scared and thought no. Why did he decide that she was in the depths of the dungeon? He thought that maybe she was waiting for him at the entrance, when suddenly he received a message updating his destination. A map appeared on his phone, and he thought why did he have a map in the application, like from a computer game? He shouted in shock that they were making fun of him, and he would not go there. Deciding that he wouldn't be there and he was canceling the order, he looked at the phone and exclaimed in surprise, "What? Divine punishment?" The phone said that there were 42 minutes and 40 seconds left. Divine punishment consists of turning the offender into a pig while maintaining his mind. Ha-jun shouted, what kind of stupid punishments are these? Tiredly looking into the sky, he thought that he was finished and shouted in doom. Why did he accept this order without even reading it? Afterwards, he thought, however, how could he have foreseen this? There were several people in black near the portal, and Ha-jun thought how could he even get past the gate guards, since he doesn't have a hunter's license. Trying to think, he said doomedly, why exactly now does tonkatsu, fried bacon, and pork soup come to mind? At that moment, he received a message on his phone, and he irritably asked, well, what? This was advice where it was written that when he needed help, he could look into the store, because he might come across goods that would help him. Ha-jun asked the store in surprise, so what if he can't buy anything? At this moment, he suddenly exclaimed, stop. What if he cashed in his points and hired a couple of hunters? He looked at the store that was on his phone and, looking at the first position, thoughtfully asked the invisible cap, what is it? Having opened the information about this, he read about a replica of the invisibility cap, a replica of the invisibility cap of Hades, the king of the underworld. This artifact completely hides the presence of the wearer. The duration of use was 30 minutes. Ha-jun shouted in amazement, seriously? Only one application for 8 million won. Later, Ha-jun wondered, is the artifact completely hiding the presence of the wearer? He decided that this was exactly what he needed now, and it's also called a promotion, but this is pure deception. Pressing the buy button, Ha-jun said irritably, stupid Olympians, he will complete this order and will not take on another one. After pressing the button, a hat appeared in front of him. Ha-jun was very surprised, and at that moment the hat, appearing in the sky, fell to the ground and Ha-jun shouted no, 8 million. He managed to catch the hat and put it on himself, after which the remaining time of 28 minutes 20 seconds appeared in front of him. Getting on the scooter, Ha-jun drove forward and easily passed the guards, when suddenly one of the guards sneezed. He said that it was because of the blowing wind, and the other told him not to pay attention to the wind, because Yong-won would come here for a raid. Ha-jun was standing in front of the gate at that moment and thought who would think of eating lunch in such a place, huh? With these thoughts, he pressed the gas and, saying, "Okay, let's go," rushed forward. In the gate, everything shone with different colors, and it said Ha-jong Lai, level 20s, male, delivery man. At that moment, Ha-jun found himself on a stone bridge in front of a large ice yurt and drove forward. He was very tense. There was no information about a hunting license, no contact with a heavenly patron, no information about physical data, superpowers, and special skills. But despite everything, his phone said that he was approaching his goal. He was very tense and scared. He would be the first to reach the very depths of Tartarus. Standing in the ruins and looking around, he exclaimed, "Oh no, why is there no one here?" Looking at his watch, he happily said yes. He finished it in less than 30 minutes, which means he won't be turned into a pig. Raising his hand to his mouth, he shouted, "Is anyone here?" He brought them delivery. Suddenly, a monster with 3 heads and glowing eyes appeared in front of him, and Ha-jun screamed in fear at his eyes. "What is this?" Afterwards, he saw a monster whose heads looked at him angrily, and he thought with fear and tears in his eyes that it would be better if he chose to become a pig. The monsters were getting closer and closer to him, and Ha-jun thought with fear, could this be his end? He thought that he still had 199 coins left, and then he realized the horror. He spent money on a stupid helmet, and could only enjoy a large plate of noodles with seafood. Suddenly, he remembered that he could use the helmet again, and when the monster pounced on him, he screamed to activate the helmet. Realizing that it was too late, suddenly the unknown girl told the monster that it was bad and should not be eaten. Ha-jun was very surprised, and, noticing her behind his back, the little girl said in surprise. He wondered what she was doing in such a wilderness. The monsters became cute when they saw her, and the girl, approaching the monster, told Ha-jun that there was no need to worry, because her dog didn't bite, and he thought that she looked exactly like her mother. Maybe this animal doesn't bite, but that's able to swallow it whole. He apologized to her and said that he had a delivery for her, but before he could finish speaking, he heard a voice asking Persephone, "Where have you gone?" It was a large man with a long beard and a skull on his belt, who stood behind Ha-jun and said that she was playing with Cerberus and entertaining a mortal who dared to penetrate the underworld ruled by him, Hades. Excited, Ha-jun began to say good afternoon. He was glad to meet him, but suddenly stopped, thinking Hades, god of the underworld. Hades said that he was the first person in the last few thousand years who dared to go to the underworld since the time of Orpheus. He used magic, and suddenly Ha-jung was enveloped in black shadows, which grabbed him by the throat and began to choke him. He coughed in horror and tried to free himself with his hands, and Hades continued, saying that Orpheus came to save his dead wife, and he came to steal his helmet. He held the helmet bought by Ha-jun in his hands, and at that moment he thoughtfully said that this was not so, and Persephone said, since he had come such a way, maybe they would at least listen to him. Hades and Persephone looked at Ha-jung while he was choking, and Hades let go of the black shadows, after which Ha-jung fell to his knees and began to cough even more. Hades turned to him with the words, "Let him state his intentions. Mortal, why did he dare to invade his domain?" Gasping for breath, Ha-jun uttered a plea to be spared, adding that he just brought the screensaver, after which Hades asked in surprise about the delivery. He asked if he had anything for him, the ruler of the underworld. Ha-jun told him that his wife sent something to their daughter, and Hades asked, "Is it true?" He said rudely, "Then why is the delivery carried out by a mere mortal and not Hermes?" Ha-jun told him that he didn't know the details, but just made the delivery and took out a white box with a red bow, shaking in fear. Hades looked at all this in surprise, and Persephone joyfully exclaimed, "This is a lunchbox from her mother." Hades asked him, "Did he say that his wife ordered the delivery?" Ha-jun thoughtfully answered him, "Yes. She asked to give this to his daughter," to which Hades told him, "But this is a lunchbox from his mother-in-law." Ha-jun asked his stepmother in surprise. Persephone was happy about the lunchbox, saying that it was still warm, and Ha-jun thought in horror,
Stop. Then where is his wife now?
Hades, looking at him, spoke here, and touching Persephone's head, he said, "My love." Ha-jun screamed in fear. What horror! He is already too old for this, but suddenly stopped, realizing that he blurted out this without thinking, and covered his mouth in fear. Hades angrily asked what did he say to him, the ruler of the underworld. Ha-jung said with horror that he would now explain everything by turning to him, but he himself realized that he was finished. Hades looked at him, and then laughed very hard, which surprised Persephone, and Ha-jun looked at him tensely and thought what? Hades said that he had not laughed so much for a long time. He did not think that someday a mere mortal would think of insulting him by asking what his name was. Ha-jun introduced himself and Hades told him, since he was able to amuse him, he forgives him for this insolence, but let him not dare to tease him anymore. He again directed the black shadows at Ha-jung, and he was scared when he saw it. It had almost reached his throat and Hades told him or be prepared for the consequences, after which Ha-jung said okay in horror. The black shadows retreated and Hades told him that this is the payment, telling him to thank his mother-in-law for the food. At this moment, Ha-jun looked at the screen in shock, where it said that the delivery was completed. He earned 10,000 coins, and Hades added another 5,000 coins to him. Now the current balance is 15,000 coins. Hades said that he would return this toy to him too, and used magic to move the helmet towards him, while Ha-jun was still looking at his screen in shock. After that, taking the helmet, he bowed and very joyfully said thank you. A man dressed in yellow was fighting a huge dragon that was growling at him. The man screamed heart-rendingly and ran towards the dragon. It was the Guild Yong-won, captain of the first team, top 100 combat hunter Du Yun-ha. The man screamed as he struck the dragon, who violently attacked back. At that moment, someone ran at the dragon from behind and hit it with all his strength with a sword. The dragon screamed heart-rendingly and blood poured out of its mouth. The monster was defeated, and the man who attacked it with a sword, wearing white clothes, spoke well, Du Yun, addressing the man in yellow clothes. He told them that they had finally cleared the first floor, the Guild Yong-won, the guild leader, the third-ranked mythical hunter Park Sung-jun. He took Du Yun by the hand and all the people in the guild shouted hooray, and he, turning to the people, said great job. It is thanks to them that the Yong-won guild is still the unchangeable leader. After these words, he exhaled, and Du Yun said that he already thought that they would die here completely. But Sung-jun answered him that be that as it may. He gave his best today better than the others, and smiling, added that he doesn't know what would the guild do without him. Du Yun said, the gentleman was touched. Tears flowed down his cheeks, and he said that he would never betray him. When suddenly Song-jun turned around and noticed a girl sitting near the dragon. He told her to relax, addressing her as Irene. She stood up in surprise, turned around and looked at him. Guild Yong-won, deputy guild leader, 17th place in the ranking, battle hunter Beak Irene. After that, she said yes, continuing to do what she had done before. And Sung-jun said that he understood that she wanted to collect as many magic stones as possible. She at that moment turned around and ran away, looking at him angrily, saying that there was something here it's heading at great speed. Looking ahead, Sung-jun tensely shouted that things were bad, and they didn't have enough energy to defend themselves. He shouted to everyone to take their places, saying that it seemed that there were still monsters left, and Irene said that they were approaching. The people in the guild screamed in amazement. Sung-jun said that he and Irene would detain the monster, and if it became too dangerous, they would have to run away. People with tears in their eyes faithfully shouted that they would fight with him and would not leave him in trouble. Song-jong, after listening to this, good-naturedly said that they were fools. At this moment, Irene shouted, "Coming!" Everyone was looking forward intently. At that moment, a man on a scooter wearing a helmet rode out of the shadows and screamed heart-rendingly, "What is this?" It was Ha-jung, who, driving up to them, shouted at them to move aside, and almost drove into someone. After that, driving past the monster, he asked in surprise, "Wow, did they kill it themselves?" He said that this was very timely, because the effect of his helmet had just come to an end. A lot of monsters with black magic live here, so they should be ready to repel the attack, and, wishing you good luck, he went forward. Everyone looked at him in surprise, thinking what was that? 150 million, if measured in years, would be approximately the era of dinosaurs, which is approximately 3 times the population of Korea. Suppose you can get 3,000 won for each delivery. Then it turns out that you need to make 50,000 deliveries. Ha-jun remembered seeing the screen window. It was written that he had earned 15,000 coins and thought 15 million said. That's how much money he would have if he exchanged the coins. He, looking at the screen, laughed and thought that he was ready to look at this figure all day. Yesterday he was almost turned into a pig, and then he was almost eaten by a 3-headed dog, and it all ended with him being almost strangled by the god of the underworld. He had been through a lot and was terribly tired, so he smiled and began to laugh madly. He realized that nothing bothers him when his account has such numbers, but he wants more gold. Yes. Ha-jun crazily raised his hands up, thinking about this. Suddenly, he put his hand on his stomach and thought that he was very hungry, wondering what he should snack on. He decided that chicken and beer would be just right. There were people sitting at the tables. A man stood in front of them, and another person with a microphone nearby said that he thanked everyone for their presence. And at this point, the conference with the guild leader Yang-won, Hunter Sung-jun, was coming to an end. Afterwards, Sung-jun stood next to Do-yoon and Irene, and Do-yoon told the leader that he had finally finished. Sung-jun said wearily that after their guild cleared the first floor, he couldn't even sit down, and now he needed to meet with the leader of the Hunters Association. Do-yoon said that he knows that times are not easy for us now, but he is very curious. Did he mention that guy at the conference? The one, remembering who he had in mind, thoughtfully said no. They had not yet found out what it was, so he decided not to raise this topic. He was too tired, so he didn't even think of catching up with him. Do-yoon said that everything is fine. They are still collecting records from that area. He wonders who it is. He wondered if it was a monster. He said that he appeared so suddenly, and yet they were the only guild that cleared the first floor. Irene said thoughtfully that he was wearing a strange helmet and was riding a scooter, and Do-yoon interrupted and said, maybe this is a hunter with magic equipment. He said that he seemed to say something about the next floor, and Sung-jun told him not to worry so much about it, because they need to clear the dungeons, not find out who this person is, adding that he is going to go to Suwon. Do-yoon heard this and shouted in horror, what? Sung-jun said that he was going to instruct the recruits to check all their weapons, but it turned out that they needed more ore, and this could only be found in the local dungeon. After these words, Do-yoon shouted in amazement, but he was going to practice with his comrades today. Sung-jun told him to leave it to Irene since he has to go since he has a driver's license. He humbly said okay, asking what he needs to get. Sung-jun thought for a moment, saying, I think it's called Heavenly Steel. At home, Ha-jun ate food and drank soda, thinking it was refreshing how he couldn't wait. But before he could speak, he suddenly jumped, because he had a new order. He immediately decided that the chicken would wait. It was written on the screen that he had a new order for delivery, and he himself thought, how can he make God wait? His whole room was filled with blue. Ha-jun found himself in another world and exclaimed, is this the abode of Hephaestus? He thought that he had ordered delivery again, exclaiming simply the best customer. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that he was in such a hurry that he forgot his uniform and scooter, thinking what should he do? At that moment, someone standing behind him turned to him, saying kid, and Ha-jun turned around, incredibly scared. Suddenly, the man took off his black hood and Ha-jun asked in surprise Hephaestus. He was dumbfounded and asked him what he was doing here and why not at home. Hephaestus, with tears in his eyes, told him that he was kicked out. And Ha-jun, insanely surprised, asked him, was he kicked out of the house? But what happened? Hephaestus answered him upset, starting his story with the fact that he and his younger brother Dionysus from time to time gather for a small feast. But this time, suddenly, his wife asked him, dear, has he taken up drinking again? Having kicked them out of the house, she said that if they were going to drink, they would do it somewhere else and not dare to come back here. Hephaestus finished by saying that Dionysus immediately fled, and he was left here alone. Ha-jun, looking at him, thought in surprise, how can this pathetic man be a mythical hero? He looked much more like an ordinary person. Ha-jun excitedly said that he was sorry, asking Hephaestus what he wanted to order. He answered him with tears in his eyes that he wanted to eat and drink something, and Ha-jun cried out in amazement, what? Hephaestus clarified that his wife kicked him out before he even had time to try the dishes, so he was simply dying of hunger, but since he is a god, of course he will not die. He emotionally said that he even begged his wife, but she refused. Hephaestus said that his wife reported to him that she had completely run out of nectar. He, turning to Ha-young, said doomedly that he was the only one left, and he nervously asked him, does he want him to bring him something to eat? Ha-jun wondered what gods even eat. He asked him what he would like to eat. Hephaestus replied that anything would do, but since he was choosing, he would like some kind of meat and more alcohol. Ha-jun, after listening to his wishes, was very surprised, thinking to himself meat with alcohol. He said good out loud, asking for a little time, and thought that it was not to say that he expected this. He looked at the phone screen and it glowed blue. Hephaestus lay on the ground and waited for Ha-young, after which he arrived, holding a box in his hand and said that he took it for himself, but would be glad to share it with him. And Hephaestus exclaimed that he has finally returned. Looking at Ha-jun's hands, he asked what it was. He answered him that this is chicken with beer, which is called chimak. Hephaestus asked chimak in surprise. They sat in front of a beautiful red sunset over pink clouds between the mountains. Hephaestus said that he thought he had never drank such beer in his life. Ha-jun happily told him that he was glad he liked it, saying that he was a little disappointed with the size of the chicken. Having said this, Hephaestus took a bite of the juicy breaded chicken and screamed in shock that this was the best meat he had ever tasted. Ha-jun, looking at him, couldn't understand. Is this really a mythical character? They sat together on the mountain and ate. Hephaestus thanked Ha-young, saying that he would thank him generously, to which Ha-young asked in surprise, will he thank him? He told him to check, and Ha-jun opened the application on his phone, where it was written that the delivery was completed. He was given 15,000 coins from Hephaestus. The current balance is 30,000 coins. Ha-jun looked at this in shock and thought he was paid 150 million won to deliver the chicken. Hephaestus said contentedly that if he suddenly needed his help, he could turn to him. Ha-jun looked at how Hephaestus laughed with satisfaction, thinking about what a cool guy he was. He was ready to hug him with all his heart. Suddenly, someone, while Ha-jun was hugging his friend, called Hephaestus by name and asked what was the matter. Ha-young was looking at the man who was standing in the distance behind them, when suddenly they both heard a voice saying dear, and at that moment Hephaestus closed Ha-young's mouth, and he was terribly surprised. He looked at the girl, who said he's drinking again. Is it the same here? The girl had beautiful long pink hair and an elegant dress. Ha-jun cried because of how beautiful she was, thinking, is she really married to this pathetic man? Suddenly, he caught himself thinking, when did he manage to kneel? Hephaestus turned to her, tensely saying that she herself drove him away and told him to drink elsewhere. The girl stood in front of him, and after listening to him, thoughtfully said that she was stupid and he was right, after which Hephaestus looked at her in surprise, and Ha-young emotionlessly told him that he should apologize to her, because he was wrong. Hephaestus said ashamedly, okay, since even he agrees with her. The girl asked the courier, is he Ha-jun? She said that she was glad to meet you, and that her name was Aphrodite, apologizing for her husband's behavior, and adding that she hoped he had not caused him any inconvenience. Ha-jun answered with a smile that everything was fine, adding that he was glad that her husband was using his delivery, and Hephaestus entered into the conversation, asking Ha-jun if he could then order something now. Ha-jun asked him in surprise now. Aphrodite folded her hands and babbled joyfully that Hephaestus had talked so much about him. He said that Ha-jun does a great job. Ha-jun smiled smugly, confidently declaring, of course, he is the deliverer of the gods. You can always rely on him. Hephaestus, holding out his hand to him, told him great. Then he is counting on him, and Ha-young thought that he was not talking to him. Hephaestus said what he needed. It was somewhere in the city of Suwon, and he needed to deliver heavenly steel. Hearing this, Ha-jun was shocked. Later, he looked at the navigation apps on his phone. It said that the travel time was 48 hours. Ha-jun wondered if he was going there. This time his goal was the Sori Mines. His heart was pounding. There was a blue gate in front of him. Ha-jun closed his eyes, thinking that he couldn't believe that he was going down into the dungeon again. Looking at his phone, he thought Munor. Ha-jun, looking at the screen, shouted furiously that this time he would not be tricked, asking what amount? Is this for delivery? They want to say. Ha-young thought that it would be so much. It seems like a safe dungeon, but it is much more dangerous here than in Tartarus. He thought that if he met a monster there, But before he could think of the thought, Hephaestus quickly said that he was apologizing to him, but he would not be able to go where he asked him to go. And Hephaestus asked in surprise why. Ha-young calmly replied that when he carried out Lady Demeter's order, he almost died. Listening to his story, Aphrodite covered her face with her hand in surprise, saying, "What horror." Ha-young said that he was not a hunter. He could not compete with monsters, even the weakest, and Hephaestus, looking at him in surprise, asked what happened. Ha-jun said that he came down only with the help of a product from a store called a replica invisibility cap, so the monsters did not touch him, but the cap expired, so now it is an ordinary helmet. Hephaestus, listening to him, opened his eyes wide, asking this helmet no longer works. He said to give it to him so that he could fix it. Ha-jun asked in surprise what. Hephaestus jumped forward and confidently said, "He's a blacksmith. Once he works on any metal or product, it becomes mythical, telling him to carry whatever he has and he will fix it." Ha-jun picked up the helmet and put it on. It was a replica of the Invisible Man, modified by a god-level blacksmith. Ha-jun put it on, confidently saying, "Let's go." Having plunged into the gate, Ha-jun was determined to make money. He appeared at night near people at the fair, and looking at them in surprise, said what? He thought in amazement that of course he understood that this dungeon was very popular, but it was too much to stand in line. He stood at the end, looking around and thinking that he expected the monsters to be his only obstacle. Turning away from the unpeople, he realized that it looked like he would have to go down much deeper to get something worthwhile. At that moment in the same dungeon stood Du-yun, who was eating food and said with satisfaction that it was very tasty for him. After 30 minutes, Ha-young said calmly, "Finally, there was not a soul around." Driving forward, he exclaimed irritably what an uneven path there is. After that, looking at the wall, he added that at least minerals appeared here, and he needed lunar steel. Moon steel is a piece of steel that emits red light. Ha-jun wondered how long he still had to go. Suddenly, a skeleton came out at him, and Ha-young screamed, terribly frightened by the skeleton, and as a result, he steered sideways and accidentally hit a stone with the wheel of his scooter, thinking indignantly, "What a shame, all because of this stupid skeleton." Afterwards, he thought why was he so scared? Because the skeleton doesn't even hear or see him. Looking at the vehicle, Ha-jun got scared and shouted, "Oh no, his moped." Ha-jun didn't have time to become sad, because he remembered that he could just buy a new one, and, smiling contentedly from all his teeth, he drove forward. Ha-jun was driving through the dungeon, lighting his way with a lantern hanging on his scooter. Suddenly, he saw a red glow in front of him. Looking up intently, he found a red light on the top of the mountain, shouting, "That's it." Taking off his helmet, he looked without taking his eyes off the stone and said joyfully, he had finally found it. Standing with a helmet near the stone, he thought, but how will he carry this cobblestone back? Ha-jun tried to get it out of the mountain, tried to beat the stone with his foot and hands, and then sat on it out of despair and crossed his arms, wondering what now. A message appeared in front of him again, saying that when he needs help, he can look at the store, because there may be goods that will help him. After reading this, Ha-jun wondered, is this system taking him for a fool or what? He was surprised to see a pickaxe in the store. It was a miner's pickaxe that helps to extract any ore from the depths once and always works. Ha-young, seeing this product, screamed in surprise, "A pickaxe for 4,700? He shouted fiercely, "What kind of pickaxe could cost 47 million won? Moreover, it will only last once. Is it made of gold or what?" Ha-jun greedily and angrily said that he wouldn't take it. There is a tool rental shop at the entrance, where he'll take it for ridiculous money. He decided that he was not going to go broke for some pathetic pickaxe. He would spend a little on gasoline. Looking at the scooter, he thought, it would be long and difficult to return there. Maybe he should still give in and do as he was told. At that moment, he decided, okay, by clicking on the purchase of the pickaxe, he simply decided to get rid of this order and ask Hephaestus to include the cost of the pickaxe in the delivery payment in the future. Ha-jun swung the pickaxe that fell into his hands after the purchase and hit the stone with all his might. At that moment, the stone was mined, and the pickaxe fell into pieces in his hands. While Ha-jun looked at this in fascination, a stone began to fall down from the mountain, and he began to scream heart-rendingly no, running after it. Having caught up with the falling stone, he took it in his hands. The stone was very heavy, because of which Ha-young could barely hold it. Pouring out sweat, he exclaimed what a heavy stone it is. He tried to put the stone in a box on his scooter. The stone was difficult to fit due to its size, and Ha-jun, looking at this, dreamily thought that he could just teleport from here to Olympus. Suddenly, he was very surprised to hear something. Turning around, he realized that a huge stone monster was standing behind him, and he screamed in fear. The monster growled in response, shaking everything around, when suddenly Du-yun, hitting a skeleton in another place in the dungeon, felt a shaking and wondered in shock what it was. An earthquake? Surprised, he looked ahead and realized that something was approaching, preparing to fight back. Something was driving towards him, and suddenly he saw Ha-jun driving towards him at high speed, shouting from the road. Du-yun, looking at him point blank, thought this is the courier, asking him, "Is he the courier from Tartarus?" Ha-jun flew past him on his scooter at high speed, shouting at him to run if he wanted to live. Du-yun looked after him in amazement, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, he turned around and saw a huge stone monster meeting Ha-jun. Terribly frightened, Du-yun ran after Ha-jun and shouted to him to give him a lift and be a friend. Ha-jun screamed madly. He almost died again. He stood near Hephaestus, who told him that he had already returned, adding that he knew that his speed would not let him down. And Ha-jun shouted furiously. He should have warned him how dangerous this building was. Hephaestus thought and said in amazement, so he didn't just say that he almost died. He added that. However, he was puzzled. There was nothing life-threatening in this task, asking him, was he driving at high speed to make it? Hephaestus said that it was dangerous and completely unnecessary. Ha-jung shouted angrily, trying to explain to him that it was not a matter of speed. This load was simply huge. Realizing that he did not understand, Ha-jung turned around and she said something. Now he will show it himself. At that moment he took the iron stone. Doomedly said that he will now show it himself. Going up to the stone and lifting it as best he could, and then throwing it on the ground, shouted, "Just look at this." He asked Hephaestus if he thought how difficult it would be for him to drag this cobblestone. Hephaestus looked at him in shock, then asked what this even was. Ha-jun looked back at him in amazement. He shouted Hephaestus, pointing his finger at him and asking, "What does this look like?" "This is the same heavenly steel or metal that he asked for?" He screamed. Let him not even think to tell him that this is not what he ordered. Hephaestus began to wave his hand excitedly, scared by Ha-jun. He said no. He misunderstood him. Ha-jun was already boiling with anger. At that moment, Hephaestus took the stone and lifted it with one hand. He said that he had simply never seen such a huge piece of ore in his life, and the purest one at that, asking where he found this miracle. Ha-jun looked at him in bewilderment, and Hephaestus ran, saying that he would show him now. He brought a small piece of stone and, holding it forward at outstretched arms to Ha-jun, said that this was the largest piece of heavenly steel that he had ever had. Hephaestus told Ha-jun that he is more capable than he seems, and he thanks him for this backbreaking work, adding that he thinks that he deserves a much greater reward, telling him to check. After this, Hephaestus was distracted by the stone, and looking at it, thoughtfully said, "Yes, and where could Ha-jun find such beauty?" Ha-jun looked at the phone with a dumbfounded face. The app said that the delivery was completed. He received 20,000 points and a tip from Hephaestus in the amount of 30,000 points. So the amount in his account was 75,300 points. Ha-jun shouted with his hand on his head, 500 million won. Hephaestus, still examining the stone, said that this was his reward for the unprecedented size of the ore. It would be unreasonable to force him to break off a piece of the ore and then send him for the rest. At this moment, Ha-jun suddenly silently fell to his knees in front of him, and Hephaestus looked at him in surprise. Ha-jun hit his head on the floor and yelled, "Thank you, master." Hephaestus laughed and said no reason, telling him to get up, after which Ha-jun said that he couldn't, because his legs were paralyzed. On TV, a newscaster was broadcasting the news that there had been a partial collapse of tunnels in the Sori mines due to an earthquake. Fortunately, there were no casualties. The public is worried that the earthquake will cause new types of monsters to emerge from the gate. The person watching turned off the TV and turned to Du-yun, asking him how to understand this. It was Sung-jun. He said that his task was easy, and Du-yun hesitated and began to make excuses, saying that it seems that entry into the Sori mines is still prohibited. Sung-jun said that he heard that he was the last to leave the mine, asking what happened. Du-yun, remembering the events, tensely answered him that a giant golem ran towards him, representing a stone monster in front of him, and Song-jung, not believing his ears, shouted the golem in surprise. Du-yun asked him if he remembered that they saw a courier on a moped in Tartarus. He said that he was there too, to which Sung-jun was very surprised, saying that the last time they saw him was in Seoul, and now he is in the Suwon area. Du-yun told him that it was strange, but it seemed to him that the golem was running after him. Song-jun, putting his hand to his mouth, thoughtfully told him that if so, he thought it was time for them to find some information about this person, thinking to himself that what happened this time and last time in Tartarus suggests that he might be an unregistered high-rank hunter. Du-yun, concentrating on the subject of the conversation, said that if he wants an investigation, then he is at his service, because he remembered the model and number of the moped, so he will get the recording from the CCTV cameras at the entrance to the dungeon. Song-young said cheerfully, "Well done. If he manages to find him, let him tell him that the guild leader Young-won wants to see him, because such a valuable recruit will greatly strengthen their guild." He added that in any case, he was glad that Du-yun was not injured in the dungeon, and asked him not to worry about closing the mines, since he would personally handle the matter. Du-yun looked at him with admiration, telling the leader that he would follow him even into hell. Song-jun laughingly thanked Du-yun, asking him, by the way, did they manage to get the heavenly steel? Du-yun looked at him shyly and felt very embarrassed. Ha-jun had 300 coins in his account. He looked at the screen and laughed, thinking that he was rich. This is a dangerous job, but it was worth it, as much as 500 million. He plopped down on the bed, deciding that he needed to look for better housing. Hunters, for example, get at least 30 billion a year. If you don't take into account the cost of the pickaxe, he still made good money, 45 million in just one day. Ha-jung thought about the fact that he was not sure how many more times he would perform the trick with the invisible cap if monsters noticed him. His legs were shaking from fear the entire time he was in the dungeon, and it was very tiring. He decided to see what was useful in the store. Opening the application, he looked at the screen and later said in frustration that all this was either too expensive or useless. He pointed his finger at the screen and said, "Wow, the cheapest weapon costs 10 billion won. Besides, these are all replicas, so it's probably only for 1 or 2 uses." He wondered if maybe he shouldn't get into a fight with monsters at all. While thinking about this, Ha-jun noticed something that interested him. He was recommended a racer suit, designed for the pace and danger of a delivery man's job. In this suit, he will overcome any difficult terrain and obstacles, depending on the level of the suit. The owner receives an increased physical abilities and special skills. Until the next improvement, you need 100,000 points. Daily use 3 minutes. Ha-jun screamed angrily. Why didn't this system show him this suit earlier? He realized that he wouldn't realize how effective it was until he put it on, wouldn't he? He was confused by the price of 50,000 points. Ha-jun thought that compared to everything else he bought, this suit was quite expensive, but on the other hand, even what he bought did not let him down. Ha-jun finally decided that this was a good investment. With this thought, he clicked on the screen, thinking that he would soon be able to pay for this suit. He would just take more orders. After the suit appeared in his room, he realized that now there was no turning back. His amount in his account was 300 coins, and he regretted his spent money. Having put on the suit, Ha-jung looked at himself in amazement. He thought that the suit would be uncomfortable, but on the contrary, he did not feel that he was wearing anything at all, and the suit was not warm. Looking at his hand, he decided that it was definitely not an ordinary one costume. Ha-jun stood up with the thought, maybe it's worth trying this out. Du-yun walked tired and thought, where is this man? He started looking for him in Suwon. Some leads took him all the way to Seoul, but even the license plate of his moped did not help him find out his place of residence, because the police said that he had never been a trespasser. Du-yun fell to his knees exhaustedly, clutching his head in doom with his hands and screaming, how can he find this courier? He was sitting on the roadway, and a guy riding a scooter told him that the light was green, and he apologized, stood up, and looking after the moped thought that it was the same model of moped. Apparently everyone has one like that now. Suddenly, he realized that the color was the same. Even the damage was in the same places. He asked himself again, is the damage on the moped the same as that of that courier? At that moment, he saw the numbers and shouted like crazy, hey, stop! Du-yoon ran after the motorcycle and shouted at him to stop. Realizing that he had missed him again, he cursed when he suddenly saw a taxi behind him. He shouted, "Great, taxi!" Jumping into the car, he shouted to the driver to go get the scooter, and the driver, in turn, rudely answered him, "Are they in a movie?" He shouted, ordering him to get out of here, and Du-yoon ran out of the car, shouting no. Realizing that I had no choice, he decided that I would have to run in the same direction after Ha-jun. Du-yoon ran as fast as he could, but suddenly fell. A girl approached him and asked him if he was okay. He couldn't answer anything because he was unconscious, and she asked him in surprise, "Isn't he Du-yoon from the Yongwon Guild?" He, waking up, answered in bewilderment that she was mistaken, because how could a representative of the guild, Yongwon, walk down the street like that? He realized that he shouldn't have chased the scooter, because he had no idea where the guy had gone. Suddenly, the flow of his thoughts was interrupted and the ground beneath him shook, which made him very scared and screamed in horror. What was that? The girl was surprised and asked, "Is there an earthquake?" Du-yoon looked forward resolutely, beads of sweat flowing from his face, and he took off from his seat, running forward. Du-yoon realized that the scooter was nowhere to be seen, but his instinct told him that he was behind the noise. An elderly woman shouted to him that it was dangerous, so it was better not to go there, and the man who stood next to her added that a loud sound came from the top of the mountain. Maybe it was an avalanche? Du-yoon is joyfully confident for them, so that they don't worry. Maybe you can't tell from him, but he's a hunter from the Yongwon Guild. He ordered them to go to safety, then quickly ran away, while the woman screamed at him to stop. Du-yoon no longer heard her, and she turned to her husband doomedly. Du-yoon walked into the forest. It seemed to him that the sound was coming from here. Suddenly, he noticed something. A large block stood in front of him. There was a big hole right through the block. Du-yoon, looking at this, thought it couldn't be. And how did this happen? He understood that this was a rather large boulder, but breaking it into pieces would not be so difficult. B-rank hunters could easily smash it into pieces, but not everyone could break through with such amazing accuracy. He thought that this was probably some kind of magic, or even divine powers. He needed to catch this guy at any cost. Ha-jun was eating something. He was sitting at the table and thought that he couldn't verify that he could punch such a hole. He recalled how he punched a block, thinking that he also managed to speed up. Even if for a couple of minutes, he knew that this suit increases physical abilities, but did not think that to such an extent. He understood that now he could calmly enter any dungeon. Suddenly, Ha-young asked in surprise, "A new order?" The notification sound was not the same as usual. It was more reminiscent of some kind of Chinese instrument. Ha-jun looked at the order and said in surprise this time the Buchan address. He thought again not to Olympus. Apparently, he was going to the dungeon again. Ha-jun tried to find this dungeon in the search engine and found it. In front of him were descriptions of Mount Huego, which is located some distance from Buchan. The mountain that rises on the horizon resembles more of a large hill. It is unpopular due to the almost complete absence of monsters and the small amount of minerals, an ideal place for hunters who love to walk. Ha-jun realized that this was a dungeon, since the delivery could not be rushed. He decided to accept it tomorrow when the effect of the suit was updated. At that moment, someone was standing outside and looking at Ha-jun. It was a girl with long blonde hair who was chewing a sandwich with gusto. Song-jung looked ahead in surprise. Saying so, did he notice him again near Noryangjin Station? Du-yoon shouted yes, he's sure they can catch him. He said that dozens of their hunters are now looking for him, and Sung-jun said, but he is the only one who knows what he looks like. Du-yoon replied that there was no need to worry about it, because he drew a poster and distributed it to everyone. With these words, he took out a poster. On it was a guy on a scooter and his distinctive features. Sung-jun thought that he was now worried, asking Du-yoon if he was sure that Ha-jun was stronger than him. Du-yoon screamed emotionally, asking he saw the photo of the boulder. What did he do? He was sure that this is his doing. He doesn't know hunters strong enough to be capable of such a thing. Song-jung said that then they need to hurry up before the Black Dragon Guild gets ahead of them. Du-yoon listened to him and sadly repeated the Black Dragon Guild. While Yongwon's guild had established itself as the best in the country, the second-ranked guild was also not far behind. Over the past 3 years, the Black Dragon Guild has risen significantly. They strive to gain control over the dungeons and engage in bribery to hide their illegal activities. This guild constantly gets involved in scandals, using any means to expand its influence. Sung Jun said that they cannot allow the Black Dragon Guild to take the highest position. Lately, they have been acting rather suspiciously, and we need to find out what they are up to. Duyun thought for a moment, and later answered as he commands, he will sort everything out. At this time, Ha Young was on Seongju Mountain in Bucheon. He was sitting on a scooter, being among the crowd, thinking that it was some kind of festival. This is strange. It seems that they wrote on the internet that the dungeon was not very popular. Suddenly, a person noticed it and shouted to stop. Ha Jun was terribly surprised, thinking he saw him. But he's in gear. At that moment, the man turned to another guy, asking him who gave him permission to hang around here. He told him to get lost, and he said in fear that he saw that the Black Dragon Guild was recruiting new members. Ha Jun realized that he was worrying in vain, because the man was not talking to him. The man shouted that a new member was entering the dungeon, and Ha Jun thought that he had heard rumors that their guild was taking over the dungeon, but he did not think that he would see it with his own eyes. He thought it strange that even the Hunters Association was not doing anything, although it was none of his business. With these thoughts, he entered the gate and found himself in the dungeon of Huagua Mountain. The application showed that the destination was ahead, and he was approaching the location. Ha Jung thought strange. According to the map, it was somewhere here. Raising his head, he fearfully thought of just not telling him that he had to meet the client at the top of the mountain. He was very upset about this, thinking, what if the mountain turns into a monster like last time and runs after him? He decided to trust the suit and put it on, hoping that it would help him deal with the monsters, thinking, okay, go ahead. Suddenly someone called out to him, calling him a courier and shouting here. Ha Jun began to look around. A voice shouted that he was looking in the wrong direction and needed to look down. Looking down, Ha Jun screamed in shock. He saw a head and screamed a talking monkey head. The man he was scared of looked out from under the ground and told him not to be so scared, asking if he had ever seen a talking monkey. Ha Jun was taken aback, asking if he ordered delivery. The man would have answered him. He said that the guy in the hat said that he could fulfill any request, and Ha Jun, looking at him in amazement, thought to himself, the guy in the hat? So, is it all his fault? The man said that he needed him to get something for him, and Ha Jun told him that he would do everything without any problems. The man turned to him and said that he could call him the beautiful monkey king, the victorious Buddha, as he wanted, but he would prefer that he call him a great sage or close to heaven. Ha Jun thoughtfully repeated handsome, victorious, asking how it goes next. The man exhaled and told him to simply call him Sun Wukong. Ha Jun repeated Sun Wukong dumbfounded. Ha Jun asked him interestedly if he could ask him a question why he was here. Sun Wukong said thoughtfully, he said about this, saying what kind of punishment. This old man, the Jade Emperor, punished him, and he just picked a couple of peaches. He said he wanted to check if it was ripe, and he buried it in a couple of bites. Ha Jun, listening to the story in surprise, asked him what he needed to bring. Sun Wukong said that there is nothing special there. He just needs to go forward, and he will come across a large pile of rubbish in which a box will be hidden. This is what he needs. Ha Jun thought a box in a pile of junk. Looking at his phone, he saw that the distance was about 6 miles. Not that far, telling him that he would be back soon. Sun Wukong looked at him from under the stone and laughed. 3 people were holding weapons, and one of them, standing, said in fear, "Is this the boss of Huagua Mountain?" In front of them was a huge stone robot overgrown with moss, and one of them shouted 8 trigrams. At that moment, a woman approached them and said that they should not be afraid. It was the leader of the Black Dragon Guild, ranked 60th, the mythical hunter Juahan. She said that there is always a way out. The Yang One Guild may have eclipsed them by clearing the abyss, but if they can defeat this boss, they will bypass them pretty quickly and take the place of the best guild. Juahan said this with crazy eyes and confidently shouted at everyone to attack. The man in front shouted forward and everyone rushed towards the monster. The guy in the helmet fearfully said that he had a strange premonition, but the monster had not even begun to move. Suddenly, they all felt a shaking beneath them. The monster stood in front of them at full height. Its eyes glowed red and the monster screamed heart-rendingly. The guy shouted, "What? And how should they fight back?" The guy in the helmet shouted, "This can't happen. They weren't warned that they would have to fight the boss. One of the three men in a suit and tie, who was wearing glasses, shouted at them, saying that they needed to stop grumbling and take their places, and anyone who left their position would be killed. The soldier shouted seriously, "How will they fight this?" The dark-haired man confidently yelled for everyone to take their places. They will be crushed into a cake if they are distracted, so there is no way to waste time. Looking at him, the man with glasses asked Juahan, "Does she think they can succeed?" Juahan covered her face with a fan and said mysteriously, "Who knows?" At that moment, Ha-jun was riding a scooter in the same area. He felt a shaking and was surprised to think, was it an earthquake? He saw monkeys running towards him and thought that even monsters run away. He sees clouds of smoke, and this is not good. At that moment, he remembered that he was wearing a suit and decided to check what was happening there by driving further. At this moment, the soldiers fought with the monster. The monster destroyed everyone. It was attacked by arrows, but they simply bounced off his stone chest. The dark-haired man said in confusion that they were not succeeding. One of the soldiers turned to Juahan, asking her if she could protect them. He said that, in fact, he came to join the guild, and not to fight. She answered him that if they get out alive, the reputation of the guild will skyrocket. Her eyes glowed madly, and the guy shouted, "What?" Suddenly, a man with glasses punched him in the face, and Juahan said self-confidently, "He came to help and clear the dungeon. It's not that difficult." The dark-haired man, trying to cheer up the soldiers and revive their fighting spirit, confidently shouted that together they would definitely cope, but the monster relentlessly attacked them while the soldiers tried to attack him. The dark-haired man shouted to attack. Everyone rushed at the monster, and it suddenly fell. One of the soldiers screamed, "Great." Another answered him. They managed to defeat the boss. Everyone joyfully exclaimed that they were alive. But one of the soldiers asked, "Is this not the end yet?" Suddenly, he looked forward in shock and saw the monster's eyes light up again and stand up. The soldiers were stunned, speechless, and Juahan laughed and said, "It's time for the second round." The huge monster walked forward while Ha-jun ran after him and shouted, "What else is this?" Do-yeon stood and thought that yesterday he was in Suwon, and today he is already heading to Bucheon. At this rate, he can travel around the entire Gyeonggi province. Suddenly, he saw the gate and thought, "Huh? Why is there no security here?" At that moment, someone called out to him. It was a plump man. Do-yeon asked in surprise, "Where did he come from?" The man said angrily to watch his tongue, thinking Do-yeon. He, getting angry, asked him again with an attack on his tongue, "Watch what he's saying." He himself thought that this was a guy from the association, becoming even more angry at him for being from the Black Dragon Guild, shouting at him from the road. As he passed by, he deliberately hit the man on the shoulder, and he shouted at him to stay where he was. Do-yeon ignored him and walked forward, thinking that if they bribed the people from the association to control the entrance to this gate, then they wanted to kill the dungeon boss. He realized that he had to warn them that the Young One Guild stopped raiding the gates of Mount Hua for a reason. The 9th trigram becomes truly furious when it enters the second phase. Ha-jun shouted in surprise, "What is this?" Looking at the monster, he realized that this was not some piece of garbage. Thinking that this was too much, even with this suit he couldn't handle it. Tensely, he cursed and thought what should he do now. Suddenly he saw Juahan and thought he knew her. She was from the Black Dragon Guild. The guy in front of her was sitting on his knees. The man with glasses was dragging him along, and he asked her to forgive him, because he promises that he will fight. Just let her let him go and not kill him. They both climbed onto the monster's shoulder, and Ha-jun, looking at this, thought what was he doing? The guy was holding the other by the hood, and there was fire below. He intended to throw him down, and the guy was screaming heart-rendingly, begging to let him go, because he would burn. The man insensitively said that this was not his problem now, because he had to die in battle, saying bye and letting go of the hood. At that moment, Ha-jun cursed and flew up to the monster at full speed, managing to grab the guy. Everyone was shocked by what was happening, and Juahan screamed, "Who is this?" They realized that he had just defeated B rank with one blow. Ha-jun held the guy in his arms and asked him how he was. He sighed, saying that he was very grateful to him for saving him, but it would be better to hit him in the eyes right now. Ha-jun did not understand what he was talking about, when suddenly he turned around and realized that he was finished. The crowd asked in amazement, "Who is this man in the helmet?" Ha-jun thought that he could just grab the box and run away, and in the meantime they would be detained by this thug. He told the man not to worry about him because he simply could not watch him being killed, and the man he saved shouted sincere thanks and ran away. Ha-jun thought that the guy was not to blame for the fact that they tried to kill him. Juahan stood in front of him and shouted that they all stood up like tree stumps. Ha-young understood that those who tried to do this to him were to blame, since everything had gone downhill. A notification popped up in front of him. The racer suit is level 1. The duration is 2 minutes 17 seconds. Ha-jun thought hard and realized that it seemed like he had no choice, and would have to try. Du-jahan glared at him from under her fan and called him an angry name. She thought that they were so close to defeating the monster. The bald man standing next to her asked her what the instructions would be for him to gather the archers. Juahan answered no. First of all, we need to collect firewood. After these words, she smiled madly. The key to defeating the 9th trigram, at the moment of transition from the first phase to the second, is that it is paralyzed for a short time, as it is now. All they could do was throw the victim into the fiery core, and it would all be over. The bald man standing next to Juahan shouted at her, "Look!" She looked up in surprise, where Ha-jun was, who had soared into the sky and was approaching the monster from the air. He was surprised, looking at the monster and thought, does it have potholes in its head? Deciding that this was probably his weak point, Ha-jung prepared his fist to hit the monster on the head with all his might. Juahan screamed in shock. What is this man doing there? Is he trying to wake up the 9th trigram? She screamed, ordering him to stop. She told them to shoot him or do whatever, because she didn't care. With these words, the archers still took aim at Ha-jung. Juahan shouted only to stop him. The monster was attacking at that time, and Ha-jung had 1 minute and 31 seconds of action left for the suit. He shouted, "Let it break already." Suddenly, the system window revealed danger, and he jumped up from the monster, dodging. With surprise, he thought, are these arrows? He was shocked. Do they really want to kill him? The bald man from below shouted to Juahan that he was dodging arrows, and she shouted in amazement and irritation that he had eyes on the back of his head. Ha-jun was moving around the monster, jumping between the arrows, when suddenly one of the arrows hit the monster right in the eye. The bald man cursed, shouting at them. Should they get up and hit him now? He shouted loudly to attack and ordered the soldiers to come closer. The monster screamed madly, and people began to run forward. Ha-young wondered in surprise why they were so stubborn. They fired so many shots that this golem seemed to have hair. He didn't understand what was happening. Juahan dropped her fan and, looking forward in surprise, said doomedly, "No, they're finished." The monster's eye glowed bright red as the second phase was completed. The monster caught fire and had Jun along with it, screaming fire. He jumped from foot to foot. The people below stood and looked at the monster, and he began to attack very violently, stamping his stone foot and making frantic sounds. The bald man shouted their army. The monster killed everyone. He asked Juahan what should they do. She froze in amazement and said that they could not do anything. They would all be turned to ashes. She looked at the monster, who was reaching out to her with his stone hand. Ha-jung, meanwhile, screamed, standing on the monster, and suddenly began to fall. Juahan, noticing him, said in shock, "Is he still alive?" He tried to hold on with all his might. There were 10 seconds left of the duration of his suit. He tried to beat the monster as best he could, but there was less and less time left. When he had 1 second left, he furiously shouted break. With these words, the monster's head exploded and it began to fall to the ground. Everything around was in smoke. Du-yun stood below and said, spellbound, "Wow, did he defeat the dungeon boss alone?" He thought, this is a simple courier. He felt favored because they had a similar fighting style, thinking that he would never have believed that he would meet a courier here. Jumping down, he decided that he would bring him to the Yang One Guild today, no matter what. Juahan stood below and coughed from the dust. She said that she would never have thought that this loser would be able to defeat the 9th trigram. The bald man turned to her with the question of what should they do. Juahan said that as soon as the dust settles, they need to grab him immediately. He clearly spent a lot of effort to defeat the trigrams. Even if he is not a registered high-rank hunter, they will grab him without difficulty, and he will answer for what intervened in the raid of the Black Dragon Guild. She began to say that she wanted to look at the one who was so brazen, but before she could finish speaking, Suddenly something fell to the ground in front of her, and Jua Han shouted, "What?" It was Du Yun who asked, "How are you, black dragons?" He stood in front of them, and they said in surprise, "Is he Du Yun?" Du Yun said that he thought that's what these scoundrels were up to. So they lured a newbie into their guild to sacrifice him to the golem. Jua Han screamed furiously. How did he know they were here? She shouted to everyone to prepare for battle, because their enemy is Du Yun from the Young One Guild. She told them to be careful with him, and he thought, he appeared in front of them so pretentiously. There were many more of them than he thought, suddenly asking himself, where is the courier? He decided that he must be nearby, and the man in the suit ran towards Jua Han, shouting that they were in trouble. She impatiently asked, "What's there again?" The man said, "You see, the guy in the helmet has disappeared." Jua Han turned to look at him and said in shock, "What?" She screamed, "Disappeared?" Where could he have disappeared after such an explosion? Du Yun thought doomedly, well, he just got involved in vain. Ha Jun walked back, holding his helmet. He thought that this was his last adventure. He almost woke up on Olympus, but not because he successfully completed the delivery. After that, he thought, although no, wondering if he died, he would go to a completely different heavenly kingdom, wondering what was wrong with him. Why did he have to step in and help this guy when he's not even a hunter? Ha Jun decided not to repeat this mistake again, suddenly noticing something. He looked forward in surprise, saying this is Seongju Mountain. Did the dungeon disappear because he killed the boss? The gates, which no one had cleared for a long time, materialized in the dense world in the form of a dungeon, so it was always possible to enter there again and again. However, passes to the dungeon were given only to carefully vetted hunters. But this time the dungeon was cleared not even by a hunter, much less not a registered courier, but an ordinary courier. He hoped that this would not cause a backlash. Suddenly, he thought for a minute, what exactly did he just risk his life for? After that, he immediately thought, oh, right. Sun Wukong looked at him and said, he came back, saying that he thought he would handle it faster. Ha Zhang cried at that moment and spoke faster. He screamed he would have known what he had to go through. Sun Wukong asked him in surprise through what? He told him to calm down and tell him. Ha Jun shouted that he said that what he was looking for was just a pile of scrap metal. But the pile of scrap metal turned out to be a huge robot golem, which scrapes the sky with the top of its head. Ha Jun said angrily that he didn't even begin to talk about that laser beam that almost burned him to ashes. Sun Wukong said in shock, what? This is impossible. Has the 9th trigram gone berserk? Sun Wukong asked him, is he sure that he did not provoke him without even knowing it? He said that the 9th trigram does not tend to move at all unless provoked. Ha Jun thought that means, if the people from the Black Dragon Guild had not come there, he would not have had to go through all this horror. He was very angry with them, thinking, maybe punish them. He could destroy them all with one blow. Ha Jun thought in rage, how dare they stop him from working. Sun Wukong said that it seems that all this is leading to the fact that he could not get his box, saying that he is sure that with rabies this is impossible, and Ha Zhang said that this is not so, because he brought it. He was shocked and asked in surprise what, but how? Ha Jun said calmly, how? He said that he broke the monster's head, that's all, taking out a box from the box and bringing it to Sun Wukong. He asked him what was in the box. Ha Zhang said that it looked like a metal box, like those used in Chinese restaurants. Sun Wukong suddenly laughed madly. He said madly that in the heavens he almost killed this monster, but now it was finished off by a completely ordinary mortal alone. Turning to Ha Yong, he asked him what his name was. Ha Zhang introduced himself, and Sun Wukong said clearly, suddenly, he used force and directed the beam at the box. Ha Yong did not understand what was happening and was very scared, when suddenly there was an explosion and he, sitting on the ground in a cloud of smoke, said after the explosion, what is this? He thought he saw a staff fall out of the box. His eyes widened in surprise, and he saw something he didn't expect. Standing in front of him was Sun Wukong, who said that he was now his debtor if he had not agreed to help. Then he would have waited for Sanzin for a long time. He said who knows how many more years he would have stuck on this mountain. Sun Wukong stood at full height on the ground, and Ha Zhang thought in surprise the golden staff. Sun Wukong, jumping onto the fluffy cloud, said, maybe he should get out of here before the Jade Emperor finds out. Taking off into the sky on this, he shouted after Ha Yong that if fate brings them together again, they will meet again. But for now, Ha-jun looked at him in amazement, shouting at him to wait. After that, he shouted that he didn't care that he was leaving, but he didn't pay him, the Monkey King. A bag of money flew into his face from above, which Haju hit, and Sun Wukong in the sky said, "A foolish young man, he, a great prophet and equal to the Celestials, is a stranger to pettiness and has already paid him." He shouted that this bag contained only a small reward for his efforts. Ha-jun held the bag in his hands and wondered with interest what was in there. Sun Wukong shouted to him, "And now, in fact, it's time to say goodbye," and left him alone. He again shouted at him to wait. "Great prophet, but isn't he even entitled to a tip?" Sun Wukong no longer heard him, and Ha-shang realized that there was no trace of him. Holding the bag in his hand, it lit up, and Ha-jung, looking there, thought, "Does he really think that this is a normal tip?" Ha-jun was contentedly eating noodles and watching TV. Breaking news was shown on TV. Yesterday afternoon, there were shocking reports that the Black Dragon Guild had allegedly cleared out Huaguo Mountain using special tactics while attacking the boss. Ha-jun looked at this and thought, "Fools." He thought, well, the dark affairs of the Black Dragon Guild were exposed to everyone. The man on TV said that now there would be a few words from a novice hunter telling what happened at the scene. The guy, holding a microphone, said that they were all deceived and no one warned that they would have to fight the boss. The girl journalist told him that there were rumors that an unknown man in a helmet had appeared on the spot, and the guy she was interviewing screamed, "Yes, it's true." He said that he saved him just as he was about to be thrown into the fiery pit, and he was the one who defeated the boss, so without him they would not have survived. Ha-jun looked at this and said smugly that he already thought that he was finished when suddenly he was carried forward. Fortunately, he kept his identity a secret and saved these people, but what was more important was his salary. His current balance was 95,300 coins. From this delivery, he earned 70,000, and it feels like after the fight with the monster, he deserved more. But if you translate all this into real money, it turns out to be as much as 700 million won. Ha-jun laughed angrily and said that with that much money, he could buy any home in Seoul. After the fight, he also received a special reward. At first, he did not understand why he needed it. It was the locks of a stone monkey, the hair of a stone monkey from Mount Huaguo, the great sage Sun Wukong. If you put your palm down and blow lightly, you could momentarily summon a clone of Sun Wukong, but there was only one use available. Ha-jung looked at this in surprise and thought it was amazing that he could summon Sun Wukong. Lately, he has often walked on the edge of a knife, facing all the monsters, even if it's just a clone, but it still won't be superfluous. Ha-jun was delighted with the gift, thinking that it was the same as having a spare life. At this moment, he received a notification that he had a new delivery request. Ha-jun took the phone, thinking just in time. He decided great. Then today he would have to work harder and, taking the suit, immediately put on the helmet. In the large building, Sung-jun ran forward, shouting to Do-yoon, "Is he okay?" He was lying in the hospital wrapped in bandages and asked, "Sir?" He said that he thought that he had already gone to Busan yesterday. Sung-jun stood in front of him and said that it was so, but he could not stay there for so long, especially since it was his fault that he ended up here. Do-yoon interrupted him by asking what? He said that it was not his fault at all. He himself should have assessed the situation in advance, and he himself is to blame. He said that he was not careful enough. Sung-jun thought that the people from the Black Dragon Guild really tried to steal the hunter from the Yongwon Guild. He realized that he should not have underestimated their abilities. He should have sent Irene with him. He decided that next time he would personally deal with the Black Dragon Guild. Sung-jun carefully asked Do-yoon, "Is he doing better?" He said thoughtfully, "Well, the doctor said that the situation is not very rosy." When he heard this, Sung-jun shouted what? He uneasily said that he wanted to say that his career was a hunter, but before he could finish speaking, Do-yoon said with a smile on his face that he was joking. He asked him cheerfully, and he believed it, right? He said that he was told that the fracture was not that bad, so the recovery would not take long, asking him did he really think that he would retire due to a couple of injuries. Sung-jun turned to him and patted him on the cheek and said that he thought now was the time for him to resign. Do-yoon shouted in fear that he would never leave because he promised to be with him until the very end. Afterwards, Sung-jun seriously shouted at the whole hospital, "Did that guy on the scooter beat the boss? Did he do it himself?" Du-yun answered yes. He saw with his own eyes that he appeared out of nowhere and cut through the thick head of this monster without even using a weapon. It was a pure fist fight. Dreamily, he said that he thought they were even somewhat similar. And by the way, he heard that some of the guys were sent to Noryongjin, asking how it all went. Have you found this guy? Song Jun displeasedly answered him that they searched all the surroundings, but did not find him anywhere. And Du-yun shouted in surprise, what? Sung Jun said that they tracked him from the cameras as he entered the alley, and then seemed to evaporate. At that moment, Ha-jun was riding a scooter and sneezed, thinking that someone remembers him with an unkind word. He drove along the pink road, saying that there is always such a temperature difference here. Later, he arrived at Hephaestus's house. Ha-young shouted to him that he was here, and going into his house, he said, "Here he is." Hephaestus was busy with work, and Ha-jun decided that he thought he should wait until he finished. Maybe it was because of the sudden heat, but he was feeling a little sleepy. Ha-young at that moment felt such a warm feeling that reminded him of something, as if he was again in his mother's arms, falling asleep. He fell on Hephaestus, and he asked him how he ended up here. Ha-jun woke up in his arms and suddenly pulled back and shouted why did he become his mother. Hephaestus laughingly said that he seemed to be tired. Today's delivery would take quite a long time, asking him if he was sure he could handle it. Ha-jun thought for a long time in surprise. He knew that they usually give a premium for this, and after that he said that he was ready to travel around the entire globe for a decent amount. Hephaestus, laughing, said contentedly that he knew that he could be relied upon, having given him a staff. He said that he had just used the heavenly steel that he had asked him for. He said that it needs to be done today, so he should hurry up. And Ha-jun asked in surprise, "Today?" He said that he thought it was time for him, and looking at what Hephaestus gave him, he thought a cane with the head of a snake. He asked Hephaestus, and where should he deliver it? He answered to the pyramid, and Ha-jun asked him in amazement what. He asked Hephaestus if he thought it would be easier to send by parcel, and in general, how does the pyramid relate to Greek mythology? Hephaestus told him that he didn't know that he was so adamant, asking him not to think about it like that. Because it's not only those on Olympus who seek his services. Ha-young, looking at him, thought let him not try to pretend to be cute. Running back, he said okay, he will deliver, he only needs a couple of hours. Thinking to himself, will he be able to get to Egypt? Hephaestus shouted after him to stop, because he almost forgot something. He said that the client he delivers to is quite picky, so he took the liberty of finding him an assistant. Ha-jun turned around in amazement and thought how can this be? Suddenly, someone said that he was greeting him, and he was here on the orders of Cupid. It was a girl who said that her name was Lucio, and she was ready to serve Hephaestus. Ha-jun was riding a scooter and thought that he was worried in vain. The pyramid is located within the mythical kingdom, so he does not have to go to Egypt. Moreover, in the clouds he does not have to hang around in traffic jams. Comparing all this, he decided that this delivery it will be easier than ever. At this moment, Lucio screamed that she had been deceived. She thought that she was going to help Hephaestus, and not to ride on some person's snag. Ha-young thought if only this girl hadn't followed him. She was pushing him in the head with her feet, and he was telling her if she could keep quiet. Does she talk too much? Lucio displeasedly told him not to call her small, because for a nymph she was very tall. Ha-young was going crazy and thinking, why did Hephaestus put this child with her? An hour ago, the girl said that her name is Lucio, and it is an honor for her to serve Hephaestus. Ha-jun looked at her in surprise, and Hephaestus asked him, does he think she will not be useful to him? Ha-jun asked him if she was his assistant. Lucio impatiently told him to follow the rules and not look down on her just because she was a nymph. Hephaestus said it wasn't that he didn't trust Ha-jun, but he couldn't deny that he wasn't that good at mythology. Ha-jun interrupted him with hostility. But Lucio understands everything very well. Hephaestus told him that he thought she would help him a lot and he wouldn't have to worry about anything. Later they were driving together and Lucio, picking her nose, said that this was very boring. Why should she do all this to help a stupid person? Turning to him, she kicked him on the head, asking how long to go. Ha-jun didn't answer and she screamed in displeasure. Is he ignoring her? He thought, here's a little thorn, telling her that if she didn't want him to leave her with the delivery, she should sit quietly and not distract him, and he would tell Hephaestus that she had completed her task. Lucio asked him in shock, is he trying to tarnish her honor? When Lucio attended Streamwater High School, she skipped 2 grades. Then she continued her studies at the prestigious Streamwater University, becoming an elite nymph, like a prophecy descended into the world. Lucio screamed at him not to even dare, but suddenly a candy flew into her mouth, and she stopped and asked, "Huh?" She covered her mouth with her hands and screamed, "What is this?" Ha-jun displeasedly thought that she was very loud, saying that it was just candy, and he would give her more if she sat quietly and kept her head down. She was shocked and couldn't understand what it was. It was a divine taste, as if angels were dancing in her mouth. But turning to him, Lucio said that she hoped that he was not lying and would give her more, and he told her not to worry, because he keeps his word. He knew that the way to the child's heart is only through the stomach. Meanwhile, they had 800 meters left to their destination. Now he can finally concentrate on the road. They calmly drove forward. Suddenly, he saw 2 glowing eyes, thinking, "What is this?" He suddenly slowed down. They were in a huge dusty cloud. Lucio at that moment turned around and said, "Man." She sat quietly, as promised, so now he has to give her candy. Ha-jun thought angrily that he could have just hit her on the head, shouting, "Hey, why didn't she warn him about the danger ahead?" Lucio screamed that he himself told her to be silent, and Ha-jun, taking her off the motorcycle, suddenly heard a voice speaking from an uninvited guest. Lucio looked forward in surprise. It was a statue of a sphinx, which said that if he wanted to pass, he needed to solve a riddle. Lucio screamed in horror, "Is it the Sphinx?" She said that this terrible monster asks a riddle to everyone who comes close and devours whole those who answer incorrectly. Sphinx, a relative of Siphon, a beast that once defeated Zeus and almost destroyed Olympus. Of course, Sphinx is not that strong, but Ha-jun is not a legendary hero, so he shouldn't go against this with just a nymph. He had a feeling as if he was going to certain death. His instinct told him that the blow was useless against the Sphinx, but there was no time to think. Ha-jun looked at the phone. I then reached out and thought, well, he hopes that he will be paid enough. With these thoughts, he walked forward, and Lucio shouted to him, "Where are he going?" He asked her, did she not understand? He is going to solve his riddle. Lucio, hearing this, screamed, but it will swallow him if he is wrong. She said that he would die in a seething stomach, and Ha-jun calmly told her not to worry, because he would not die. He was not that stupid. Everyone knew the riddle of the Sphinx. Lucio flew on wings in the air, and before that she spoke terribly, and Ha-jun thought that the riddle was so popular that it was simply impossible to make a mistake, although he himself understood that he would definitely not solve other riddles. In this case, he had with him Sun Wukong's curl. If anything suddenly goes wrong, the Sphinx turned to him, asking him if he was ready to solve the riddle. Ha-jun told him that he didn't have much time, so he asked him to ask it faster. Lucio at that moment screamed in shock. He actually accepted the riddle. She cried with fear, and the Sphinx said guess or die. At that moment, she decided that she, an incredible nymph, intended to solve the riddle by any means, after which the Sphinx said excellent. Here is the riddle. Ha-jun thought that the answer was obvious. It was a person. He thought the riddle would be, who walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? He has seen this riddle on TV so many times that he remembers everything perfectly. He will solve the riddle, and he won't even have time to finish. The Sphinx asked him what sound does a duck make when it falls. Suddenly, Ha-jun was very confused looking at this, and the Sphinx was waiting for an answer. Ha-jun asked the duck in surprise. Lucio tried to think, racing thoughts in her head, and suddenly, giving up, she screamed that she didn't know the answer, and she was sorry that she couldn't help. She screamed furiously that she didn't want to be eaten alive. An unknown girl stood with her hands over a glass ball and said, smiling, that it seemed they had curious guests. Dust swirled around. The Sphinx imperiously told him to tell him the sound that a duck makes when it stumbles and falls. Ha-jun stood in front of him and thought, what? Is this a riddle? Like a stupid joke? He thought that the answer was already obvious, suddenly realizing that no, this is the Sphinx. This question may have an unexpected twist. The Sphinx said that he had 3 minutes to solve it, after which Ha-jun thought that, however, he had overestimated him. Lucio cried, saying, it means it's true that these riddles cannot be solved. She said that even she, the mega elite, has no idea, and now this Sphinx will eat her, all because of this stupid man. Before this, Lucio was in the forest, asking a man, turning to him as a professor, Are the Sphinx's riddles really that difficult? The man with glasses and a mustache answered her that she herself could guess that before Oedipus managed to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, it had already swallowed up several hundred people. Lucio screamed in shock, so even he couldn't solve the Sphinx's riddle. He replied that not only he, even the dean could not. If she had the misfortune of meeting the Sphinx, then it was better to run as fast as she could without looking back. Lucio cried, saying that he warned her they would never solve this riddle, but at that moment Ha-jun decisively declared that the answer was Quacko. Lucio suddenly went completely cold, shouting what? She asked what he allows himself, man. She was furious. How could he waste their only attempt on this so mediocrely? She screamed Quacko. This would never even occur to a complete fool. Shaking him, she screamed in rage that if he so wants to die quickly, that he should do it when she is not around. At that moment, the Sphinx laughed, saying that this was right. Lucio asked in shock, how could this answer be correct? Ha-jun asked her, has she never heard of absurd riddles? The Sphinx, turning to Ha-jun, said the alien, he praises him for this riddle, and now he can pass. Ha-jun suddenly shouted rudely at this moment, can he shut up? He solved his stupid riddle, so let him leave him alone, Sphinx. Hearing this, he shouted what? Ha-jun told him to come up with something smarter next time, because this is a kindergarten, and, having shouted this, sat on his scooter at that moment. Starting the engine, he looked at the Sphinx's face and asked her, is she crying? Ha-jun laughed, and the Sphinx sent him away, saying that he just got sand in his eyes. Ha-jun drove back, thinking that the quest with the Sphinx was successfully completed. It was a Sphinx named Hippopotamus. He needs to be tamed like a cat. Ha-jun turned to Lucio, warning that he was speeding up now, so she should hold tight, to which she told him okay, thinking that he was a human. But then how did it come to his mind? They were in the gorge. Ha-jun said that they were almost there, and they just needed to cross the gorge. And at that moment Lucio embarrassedly turned to him, saying man, and he asked her what. She said that she apologized to him for her words, because she was supposed to help him along the way. But all she did was condemn him for being a human, and now she does not deserve to be called a mega elite. Ha-jun good-naturedly told her to stop, because she had nothing to reproach herself for. He sometimes heard worse things in his work as a courier, so her words didn't hurt him at all. He said that he felt like it was the holidays and he was babysitting his younger cousin, so she didn't have to worry and everything was fine. Asking her did she understand? She surprisedly thanked him for this. Later, they arrived at the pyramid. Standing in front of it, Lucio said that she suspected that the pyramids were so huge, but she couldn't even see the top from here. Ha-jun shook his head. According to the map, they should have been expected here. Suddenly, Lucio shouted at him to look, because there was something written there. Ha-jun asked in surprise, what is this? Lucio began to read what was written, saying that it is written here, if there is no guard, ring the bell. Ha-jun, after listening, said in shock, wow, can she read Egyptian hieroglyphs? Lucio, smiling, smugly answered yes. After all, she is a mega elite, and he told her that this is really cool. He pressed the call button, when suddenly everything glowed blue and he shouted what was happening. Lucio said that this is some kind of gravitational magic, but it also says to ring the bell. At that moment, the floor collapsed under them, and they screamed that they were falling. After that, they fell to the ground. Ha-jun cleared his throat and said that he couldn't even believe that he survived such a fall. It was very painful for him to get up, and suddenly he exclaimed, Lucio? She lay crushed under him, and he said that she would at least say that he crushed her. Lucio was silent, and he asked in shock, did he kill her? She lay there and answered no, he didn't kill her. They walked along a dark corridor. Ha-jun shined his flashlight on his phone ahead, asking what now. He was thinking that it was as if he was not making a delivery, but going through some kind of quest in the dungeon. Lucio suddenly stared at something, turning to him, and he asked what. Does she mean there are traps in the floor? Lucio asked him to point his shining piece of metal here, pointing at the wall, after which Ha-jun asked her to shine it on the wall. He handed over the phone and asked what was written there. Suddenly, he said this is the same fresco. It looks like there are people and giants painted here. Lucio shouted in shock at this mural. Ha-jun asked her with interest what it was. Did she understand something? Lucio told him that she had heard about a certain evil goddess who loved to kidnap and torture nymphs. These frescoes must have been created by her ancestors to tell about terrible crimes against their people. Ha-jun looked at the frescoes and thought that he personally didn't see any crimes in these pictures, and in general, it looked more like a holiday. And Lucio shouted that they say you meet enemies when you least expect them. She screamed that on this day she would take revenge for the suffering of her ancestors, to which Ha-jun calmly told her no revenge, asking, "Okay?" He said that whoever lived in this pyramid, this is first of all their client. Suddenly someone from behind stepped on the ground with their foot, which illuminated everything around them with light, and asked revenge. Why did they sneak into the goddess's house? It was a beautiful girl with dark hair who was looking into the ball earlier. A glow emanated from her, and she said little rude things. The girl stood in front of them and said, "So which one of them wants revenge?" The light was so dazzling that Ha-jun couldn't even see who was saying it. Lucio fervently said that her ancestors must be avenged. After these words, Lucio thoughtlessly but confidently flew towards the girl, after which Ha-jung shouted at her to stop, thinking an impulsive child. "Well, why attack right away?" The girl said in surprise, "So is she a nymph?" She said that she had not seen anyone like her for a very long time. Lucio made an irritated sound, and at that moment the girl hugged her, joyfully exclaiming, "They are so cute." Lucio screamed at her to let her go now, because she was the sworn enemy of her people. Ha-jun looked at them in surprise, not understanding what was happening. The girl said that a long time ago she invited nymphs here, organizing holidays and competitions for them. But while telling this, the girl remembered how sweet the young nymphs were. Upset, she said that, unfortunately, they were no longer with her. Ha-jun asked her in surprise if all these nymphs really died like that, through suffocation in her arms. All this time the girl hugged Lucio, letting her go. She said that she couldn't stop herself and always behaves like this when she sees something so cute, and Ha-jun now understood what Lucio meant by torture. Crying, she shouted to the girl that she almost killed her, just a little more, and she would have been on a boat crossing the river Styx. Turning to Ha-jun, she screamed, "Why didn't he save her?" Ha-jung told her, "No, he already told her to learn to control herself," and Lucio squealed even more. He said that she was like a cousin to him, so why doesn't he protect his sister? He tried to get rid of her, ordering her to stop being capricious. The girl looked at them all this time in surprise, standing to the side, saying that it seemed she had not introduced herself. She said that she was the mistress of the two richest and sunniest countries, the high priestess of all the temples of Egypt, the divine incarnation of the omnipotent Falcon Mountain, and her name was Pharaoh. Standing majestically in front of them, she waited for a reaction, but Ha-jun and Lucio did not listen to her. He invited her to sort it out once and for all, and the winner would be considered right, and she answered him, "Come on." Pharaoh, looking at them, asked if they had heard anything. Ha-jung, distracted, said that he heard that she was Pharaoh, but he thought that the king of Egypt was called Pharaoh. And Lucio said displeasedly that he was ignorant and would be better off keeping quiet. Lucio said that in this world there are two types of gods and goddesses. There are people like Cupid or Hephaestus. They were born gods. There are also those who have achieved godhood during their lifetime, like this old ant. Pharaoh turned to her, asking if she didn't think it was ugly to call her old. She was afraid that she heard her, and Ha-jun turned to her, saying that they were only here because they were making deliveries. Pharaoh replied that she knew. She had been watching them all the way through her crystal ball. With these words, she took out the ball, and Ha-jun said in amazement, "But what?" Suddenly, he took out a cane and threw it to Pharaoh, who caught the cane, saying, "Excellent, excellent work, and the shape is just perfect," and thanking him for bringing it to her. Turning to him, she said that he fully lives up to his reputation, and Ha-jun thought in surprise, "Reputation? Since when did he have a reputation?" Suddenly, with realization, his eyes widened, and he thought, "Stop. This means that," but without completing his train of thoughts, he said out loud that he thanks her for using his delivery service. After asking for the payment and tip to be sent to his account, he thought he'd take it while he could. Lucio looked at him and said with disgust that he was disgusting, thinking, is it really necessary to behave like a greedy merchant at the market? She turned to Ha-jung and asked him where his self-respect had gone. He asked in surprise about her self-respect. He passionately told her that self-respect cannot be put on bread. By the way, with the very money he earns, he bought her the candy she liked so much. And she, looking at him dumbfounded, thought, "Candy?" At that moment, she was drooling at the thought of the candy. She ran up to Ha-young and was scattered in gratitude to the pharaoh for taking advantage of his delivery. And Ha-young thought what a drop of capitalism was doing to the nymph. Pharaoh said that she was pleased to see that he was friends with this small people, and he did not have to worry about payment, because she was a very generous goddess. Ha-jun received a notification that the delivery was completed, and he received 50,000 points, as well as a tip from Pharaoh, which was also in the amount of 50,000 points. In total, he had 195,300 coins in his account, a total of 19,530,000,000 won. Ha-young was amazed by these numbers. Lucio turned to him, said that she helped him, so now he has candy, and he asked her for candy. With a smile, he said that now he could buy her the entire candy store. He thought to himself that maybe he would even open a confectionery factory, and Lucio said that then she would get 90% of the income, after which Ha-jun asked seriously. The pharaoh spoke touchingly just to look at this little predator, telling Ha-jun that now that he was leaving, he could exit through the central entrance, and not through this tunnel, after which he asked in surprise what. He answered him that, of course, she was nostalgic to come down here, but she was somehow tired of receiving couriers in the basement. Ha-young, puzzled by her words, said that he thought that this was the entrance. Lucio said that there was a bell at the entrance, and it said if there is no security to call. Pharaoh said that there had been no guards there for several centuries, and they could just leave through the main entrance. Ha-jun asked in shock, "Really?" Lucio said happily, "So this means that this is not the front door." She said that Ha-jun was offended by saying that there would be no candy. The nymph screamed that he was evil, but at that time the delivery to the pyramid was completed. Arriving back to Hephaestus, Ha-jun wearily said that they had finally returned. He didn't even know how they survived. He began to wake up Lucio, who was sleeping, saying that they had arrived. So it was time for her to wake up. She was drooling in her sleep, and Ha-jun, realizing this, became very disgusted. Lucio woke up, asking him if they were already back. He asked her, "What do you mean already?" She doesn't see that it's already dark. Lucio said that she couldn't see anything, to which Ha-jun asked, "So maybe she'll open her eyes." He said that they were in the forge of Hephaestus, and Lucio, when she opened her eyes, was stunned. She turned to him. Ha-jun asked her what. She said that she was grateful to him for this adventure, because she had a lot of fun, after which Ha-jun looked at her in surprise and asked, "What's wrong with her?" Looking at her, he really thought they made the delivery, so it was time to say goodbye. Ha-jun remained thoughtfully silent, and then said that it was mutual, because he also had fun with her, even though she talks a lot. Lucio grimaced with displeasure and asked him why he said that. He ruined such a touching moment. He told her that he was telling the truth, and she wouldn't deny that she talked a lot. He thought that it seemed that they had already become attached to each other. Lucio said that she would never work with him again, and Ha-jun answered her that this was also mutual. He didn't expect them to become friends. Hephaestus, coming, carefully said that they are his stars, and he has nothing but enthusiastic words. He said he thought, what if they worked as a couple? Ha-jun listened to this in surprise, looking at Lucio and asking together with her. She answered dissatisfiedly that she should work with this person. They both squealed. No way, it's better to die than work with this bore. In the morning, sunlight was breaking through the window. Ha-jun was sleeping sweetly on the bed, when suddenly someone called him, waking up. He opened one eye and said, "Who is there?" It was Lucio, who shouted at him to wake up quickly, shaking him, and he, suddenly frightened, asked what she was doing here. Lucio was also frightened by the harshness of his words, exclaiming, "Why is he shouting at her?" She asked him in amazement, had he forgotten that they were now a team? Suddenly he remembered, thinking for sure, he could not refuse Hephaestus. He sat sadly in front of them, tucked his legs under him, and said upsetly that he never asked his son for a favor, and all for the sake of this. Because of him, Ha-jun had to team up with this as a child, thinking, well, now I'll have to get used to it. Touching his face with his hand, he asked her why she woke him up. He was sleeping so soundly, after listening to him. Lucio said that there was a noise that still didn't stop, and Ha-jun asked her with genuine surprise what the noise was. She said what about this and gave him the phone number. He took it and said, stunned, delivery. He had as many as 4 delivery notices. Ha-jun shouted it couldn't be. Looking at the screen, he calmed down, thinking okay. These were the most ordinary orders. He had no reason to worry. If you think about it, a week had already passed since he started delivering orders to the gods. Lucio asked him what was it. Everything is fine? Ha-jun told her that it was nothing and asked her not to worry, but Lucio screamed angrily that she wanted to know what was the matter. Ha-jun asked her just not to start again. Suddenly, taking the phone, Ha-jun said that someone was calling. Very surprised, he realized that it was the manager, but decided that he should tell him that he was quitting. He answered the call. He said hello, when suddenly the manager started shouting loudly at him, yelling, "Didn't he notice that he was not at work again?" He rudely asked him why he doesn't take orders anymore. The manager shouted so loudly that Ha-jun had to move the phone away from his ear, speaking in general, but the manager interrupted him, asking, did he even look at how many deliveries were in line? It was Delivery Department Manager Dalman B., age 39, note baldness. He, holding a cigarette in one hand, told him that he should actually be grateful that he didn't fire him. He was lucky that he was suspended for a short time. He then said that it seemed he had not learned his lesson, ordering him to get to work immediately or he would fire him. Ha-jun finally boiled over and, shouting down the manager, yelled for him to fire him, and he flew into a rage, shouting at him, what did he say? Has he really gone crazy? He interrupted, shouting at him, even if that was the case, what would he do to him? Lucio looked at all this and said, oh my god, the energy level is 20,000, 30,000, no, 40,000. She realized that Ha-jun was not behaving as usual. Suddenly something flew into her eye, and she screamed that she couldn't see anything. Dalman asked him if he thought he could find another job. He said that he would blacklist him, and he would be finished. And Ha-jun replied that he was already tired of these angry threats. And it is not surprising that the hair was even running away from his bald head. He was tired and let him do what he wants. Having said this, he said goodbye to him and hung up, and Dalman thought, what does his hair have to do with it? Suddenly, he realized that it was a blow below the belt and began to cry from resentment, and Lucio asked Ha-jun if he was okay. He, having caught his breath after the telephone conversation, cheerfully told her that they should go eat, having finally thought. In the large building, Sung-jun asked in surprise yesterday. He also couldn't be found. The man with pink hair told him that they searched every corner. It was the captain of the 3rd Division of the guild, Yong-won Chan-suho. He said that none of them could notice either the scooter or the helmet, saying that if his scooter was so difficult to track, maybe he realized that he was being followed and changed his license number. Sung-jun tiredly closed his eyes, and putting his hand to his forehead, he still said thank you for checking, thinking that he already had a lot of problems, and so did this guy. Chan-suho asked him should they continue the search. Sung-jun answered him no. They can't waste their strength like that, asking him, by the way, what's there in Busan? Chan-suho replied that they were not doing very well. A squad of 6 ranks sent to the raid retreated. It seems that in 5 days the portal will turn into a full-fledged dungeon. Sung-jun, standing thoughtfully by the window, said that he understood that a month ago a portal appeared on Hyundai Beach. When the association contacted them, he immediately realized that clearing the dungeon would not be so easy. But he did not think that 6 ranks would not be enough. Suddenly smiling, he realized that he knew what to do, and turning to Jang Suho, he told him to tell Irene and the first squad to begin preparing to leave. Jang Suho squealed in surprise. Does he want to go to Busan? Song-jun, standing with his back to him, was thinking about what he would show everyone again. His hand glowed blue, and he thought that he had not gone on a business trip for a long time. Why they were considered the best guild in the country. Ha-jun drank from the bowl and spoke into the bullseye. He really wanted something spicy. He thought he would have loved to have seen the manager's face when he said he was quitting. It was so cool. Lucio sat next to him and also ate, saying that she had never tasted such delicious food. Ha-jun told her to slow down, because she could stain all her clothes, and she said that even this soft oval thing tastes incredible, exclaiming who would have thought that there are so many goodies in the human world? Enthusiastically, she said that it felt like she had lived her whole life in vain. Ha-jun looked at her with a smile and said that it was just a plate of noodles. The workers standing at a distance from them were whispering, talking to each other. It must be not easy for them. The girl is trying black bean noodles for the first time. Apparently he is a single father. Ha-jun, looking at them, thought, what are they saying there? After eating, they walked down the street. Lucio held her stomach and said that she felt like she was going to explode. Ha-yoon, wiping her dirty mouth, said that he warned her not to eat so much. At that moment, he thought that he really felt like he had a daughter, and Lucio shouted at him, "That's enough." The people standing nearby were whispering, saying, "Isn't this the guy who lives opposite?" They said that this building only had tiny apartments, which were definitely not suitable for raising a child. Ha-jun happily walked down the street, realizing that everyone in the area thought he was a slacker. He realized that since they would now have to live together, he should find a larger apartment by asking her. Should they move? Lucio, stunned, shouted to move, right? Ha-jun looked at her in surprise and asked why she was so excited. She asked him in response, wouldn't he be happy if he moved out of some shallow puddle? Ha-jun said in surprise that she spoke as if she had lived here all her life, and she said that since they are moving, "What about that palace?" She pointed her finger at a huge skyscraper. Ha-jun asked in surprise, "What? Is she joking?" He asked her if she even knew how much an apartment costs there. Definitely no less than 20 billion won. Lucio screamed, where did all the money go that she helped him get in the pyramid? Looking at his balance, he thought that he could actually afford it, wondering if it might be worth buying an apartment. Later, Lucio screamed, "Wow, it's so spacious here." They were in a luxurious apartment, and she asked if they would live here now. Ha-jun said that he had not decided yet, and while looking around the premises, he thought that the building was new, so he understands that it is luxurious. He turned to the employee, asking if he could repeat it again. So he answered, of course, starting the story. The current owners will be able to move out in 2 weeks. The payment is about 200,000 won per month. The man enthusiastically said that he simply could not find more luxurious conditions. He said that the location of the building is simply gorgeous. It is not too high. There is a school and transport nearby, telling him to believe that he will not regret the purchase even after 20 years. Ha-jun stopped him with a gesture, saying thank you. It's really great here, but he would like to see other places. The man answered him, of course. He will show everything that is available. Ha-jun thought that buying the first place was not very smart, telling Lucio that they should go and look at the new place. She stood by the window and turned around in surprise and asked, "So they won't live here?" He said that he had not decided yet, and took her, and she screamed, breaking free and accusing him of being a liar. Carrying it in his hand, Ha-jun looked to the right and saw a girl. It was a blonde who stood staring at him. Walking by, Ha-jun suddenly realized that he knew her. Lucio was eating noodles. She said with pleasure that it was just a divine taste. Suddenly, looking at Ha-jun, she asked him a question, why doesn't he eat? He looked at the sheet, saying he bought a house on the first day of searching. He was incredibly pleased with himself. This is of course very cool. After a whole day of searching for an apartment, he still settled on the building that he saw first. He bought an apartment at a price much lower than the market price, but something still bothers him. That girl he saw yesterday, he is sure that he saw her among the hunters in the dungeon. The helmet covered half of his face, so he thinks that she did not recognize him, but still. Thinking about this, Ha-jun took out his phone and suddenly asked excitedly why he wasn't getting any new orders. Lucio asked him in surprise, haven't they already finished one? Ha-jun said that there was nothing new in 2 days, and Lucio told him that 2 days was not so much. Ha-jun told her that he used to receive at least 1 order a day. He was upset and worried that he was now in a lull, and Lucio shouted, "What, so often?" She told him that too much greed never leads to good things, and he had enough money from his last deliveries. Ha-jun told her that he had enough money until yesterday. His current balance was 19,370,000,000 won. This is how much is left after paying for the apartment, but together with the remaining amount, a total of 17 billion won for the apartment alone. While trying to figure out a budget, Ha-jun thought that on top of that, he needed to buy new furniture and appliances, as well as pay a realtor. If you take into account all the expenses, it turns out that all of his money was spent on housing. Ha-jun fell to his knees and began to beat his hands on the floor, and Lucio screamed in surprise, "What?" It was a mistake by the new tenant, overestimating his finances. Lucio exclaimed, "Why is housing so expensive?" She told him that he could buy a castle in the divine world. Ha-jun asked her, why should he know? Seoul has always been expensive and nothing can be done about it. Lucy, standing in front of him, asked him what should they do. Ha-jun responded to her by saying that he was sorry to say this, but they wouldn't be able to buy candy anymore. Lucio, hearing about this, screamed in amazement that she was against it. Thoughtful, she said that she would definitely come up with something, and Ha-jun answered her that now she understands what's what. Suddenly, an idea came to her, and she enthusiastically asked him why shouldn't he become a promoter. Ha-jun answered her, should he become a door beggar? Lucio told him that they didn't have to wait for a new job to appear. They could go to Hephaestus and ask if he knew any gods or heroes who needed delivery. After these words, Ha-jun began to pat her on the head, saying that he admits that she is quite smart, and maybe even a real genius. Having said this, he laughed and asked how they could get to Olympus. Lucio looked at him, very disheveled, and spoke as usual. Ha-jun. Hearing this, he asked, what do you mean? He said that he would teleport there when he was given a new order, and she was surprised and asked what. The helicopter stood on the landing pad, ready to take off. Near this was the Yang 1 Guild, Squad 1 and Squad 2, a total of 45 hunters, all of them gathered around the helicopter. Among them were Irene and Song-jun. Song-jun said that he was sure that they had all heard that today they were going to Hyundai Beach in order to deal with the new portal. He confidently shouted that he wanted them to forget their previous failures and bring the guilds again glory. Everyone nearby shouted yes in unison. Captain, hooray! Song-jun turned to Irene, saying that they should go, after which she agreed with him and went. Taking off in a helicopter, they sat in it and Sung-jun, during the flight, turned to her and said about what she said earlier, asking is she sure that that guy is now her neighbor. She told him that she couldn't find out if he actually moved there, but he obviously visited the apartment, and he asked her in surprise, really? He thought about how they had searched every corner to find him, wasted so much time and money, and yet he had ended up right under Irene's nose. He asked again, is she really sure she saw him? She answered confidently yes, and Sung-jun realized that now it would not be difficult to find him, so now he needs to focus on the portal. Irene looked out the window, thinking about what was happening. He was the one who defeated the boss. She really hopes that one day she will be able to catch him in battle. Ha-young was near Hephaestus' house. Entering it, he said hello. Noticing that he was not there, he asked Lucio if he wasn't working today. She said that his light wasn't even on, and suddenly burst into tears and said that she thought it was better for them to leave, afraid that what if they received divine punishment for entering without permission. Ha-jun stared at her in surprise, asking what. But they have already arrived. He told her that she actually invited them to come here, and she, still crying, screamed, but this is terribly disrespectful. Ha-jun thought disrespectful. But this is said by a little girl who called Pharaoh old. Suddenly they heard a menacing voice asking who dares to come to him so early. It was Hephaestus, who, seeing them, exclaimed good-naturedly, "Oh, it's them." Everyone turned to him, and Hephaestus said in surprise that he had not ordered delivery, asking what brought him here. He sheepishly replied that this was the case and he had a request. Hephaestus asked in amazement what his request was. Ha-jun said that they thought it would be rude to come empty-handed, so he started to take some things out of his bag, and Hephaestus squealed, "What is he thinking?" Ha-jun, holding a bottle, said that he brought saju. He remembers that he liked the beer, so he decided to bring it and try it. Hephaestus, taking the bag, said laughing. He told him to report what they needed, and Ha-jun shyly began by saying that he wanted to ask if he could introduce him to any gods or goddesses who might be interested in his delivery. Did he thoughtfully repeat the delivery? He said that he had someone on his mind, but before he could finish speaking, Ha-jun grabbed him, asking, "But what?" Hephaestus answered him that he was afraid that it was too dangerous, and Ha-young confidently exclaimed that he should not worry, because he promises to grab every opportunity, since there is nothing more dangerous than poverty. Hephaestus told him that if he thought that the truth could handle it, then let him teleport him. And with these words he pointed his hand at him, which turned blue. A blue light enveloped Ha-young, he screamed, asking him to wait, because he did not say who. But before he could finish speaking, Ha-young woke up in the forest, asking where he was. The forest was dark and dense. Ha-jun, standing in the middle of it, thought that Hephaestus threw him away without giving any explanation, thinking what did he even expect from him? Suddenly, the system showed that the danger had been identified. Ha-jun, opening his eyes in amazement, realized that something dangerous was heading towards him. Suddenly, she noticed a huge wild boar that glowed red and ran furiously towards Ha-jun, who squealed in horror. What else is this? He realized that he could not dodge, and screamed loudly, when suddenly someone shot at the boar, after which it squealed and flopped to the ground. Ha-jun was shocked. He asked in fear what it was. Approaching the animal, he thought it was dead. Suddenly, Lucio jumped out of the grass and screamed "Phew," barely making it. He was almost turned into a human cake. Ha-jun shouted in amazement at Lucio. He said that he didn't know that she was following him, and Lucio said that after he disappeared, she was also moved here. Ha-jun sarcastically thanked her for silently watching him suffer here and not even helped. Lucio screamed with her arms outstretched, "But this is such a spectacle." She excitedly said that the boars of Olympus are known for their ferocity, and he killed it with one blow. With surprise, Ha-jung said that it was not he who killed, when suddenly he heard a voice saying that it was him, and Ha-jung said in surprise that he did not know that there were people here. A creature with the legs of a horse approached him, when suddenly Ha-jung looked up and saw that above the horse's legs there was a human body with a head. The centaur said that it was a man and a nymph, and Ha-jung thought in shock, "What kind of strange man is this horse?" He thought from above he is a man, but from the waist down he is a horse. Suddenly, he received a notification on his phone and saw that it was written on the screen that he had arrived at his destination, after which Ha-jun thought, "So this strange man is his client?" The man said that strangers do not often come here, asking them if they could tell who they are. Lucio shouted the lame centaur. She noticed a bandage on one of the centaur's legs. Turning to Ha-jung, she said that she seemed to know who it was. Jason, the leader of the Argonauts, Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, and the greatest warrior who, during the Gigantomachy, led the Olympian gods to victory, Hercules, and this was Chiron, the mentor of these great heroes. Chiron said, "Did they just say the name Hercules in his presence?" He, taking out a bow and pointing it at Ha-jun, asked does he even know what he went through because of this fool. Ha-jun frightenedly shouted at him to wait, because he was generally silent. He jabbered as quickly as possible that Hephaestus sent them. They came with a delivery, but not at all to cause him trouble, he swears. Hephaestus said thoughtfully to Heron, suddenly shouting even more furiously, "Are they taking him for a fool?" Ha-jung, screaming, dodged his arrows, and yelled that he was not lying. Later, they were in an old house in the middle of the forest. Ha-jun sat in front of Chiron and said that this is how they ended up here, and Lucio added that it was true. Chiron, raising his hand to his face, thoughtfully said interestingly, "Hephaestus, as a rule, does not mention him in the presence of just anyone." Looking at Ha-jun, he thought no, whatever one may say, he is by no means a hero. Looking at Lucio, he thought, however, this is a nymph. Even the most eminent heroes can hardly boast of friendship with nymphs, especially if they were their travel companions. Ha-jun whispered to Lucio, "Hey, why is this man so suspicious? They already explained everything to him. Why doesn't he believe them?" Lucio answered him that she didn't know. They said about him that he had a wounded soul. Chiron stood thoughtfully in front of them all this time and said that he decided that he believed them. Lucio shouted to Chiron with joy, "He is truly the wisest of sages." Chiron asked, "So the two of them can give him whatever he wants?" Ha-jun embarrassedly said that not literally everything, but a lot. And Chiron, looking at him, thought that maybe he was worth testing. He told them to go through the forest to the north. There they would find a giant cave. They need to collect the saliva of the lazy Hulk who sleeps in it. After receiving the jar, Ha-jun asked in surprise what saliva was. He thought Chiron wanted him to put some saliva in a jar and bring it to him. Ha-jun asked him a question out loud, saying that he hoped he didn't have to literally take saliva from this man's mouth, right? Chiron answered him no, in the literal sense, asking him if he had any objections. Ha-jun thought that this was, of course, a completely unthinkable violation of another person's personal space, but he ran back and laughed, saying of course, he can assume that he already has a jar of saliva. He thought that this was not a reason to refuse the order, and Chiron looked after him, saying a fool. He did not even bother to ask what dangers awaited him on this path. This was a simple test that would show whether he should be trusted. Even if by some miracle he came out of this forest alive, then he would have to cross the rocky, snow-covered city, through which no person could pass. Chiron thought that if he was an empty talker, one look at these mountains would make him give up. Ha-jun ran as fast as he could, pushing off the ground. He flew up and Chiron said in shock, "What?" His racer suit had a super jump skill. One time use lasted 1 minute. Ha-jun thought that he was already quite used to this suit. At this speed, they would soon reach the cave. He jumped on the rocks and finally landed in front of the hole in the rock. The destination was reached. At that moment, he received a notification that the racer suit was disabled. The reboot time was 32 seconds. Ha-jun, seeing this, thought what a shame. He used the functionality of the suit too mercilessly. He said he was dizzy, asking Lucio if she was very ill. He told her that since they were here, they needed to get him saliva, and Lucio answered yes, offering to do it as quickly as possible. They walked through the cave. Ha-jun illuminated the path with a lantern and thought that they had already descended deeply, but he did not see anyone sleeping here. Suddenly, looking at Lucio, he asked her, was she scared? She spontaneously answered him that fear is not characteristic of mega elites, when suddenly she saw something shocking and screamed in horror. Ha-jun told her not to scream so suddenly, because she was confusing him by asking why she was scared. He said it was just a couple of drops from the ceiling, and Lucio hiccuped in fear. Ha-jun said that he thought she saw a monster, when suddenly he got scared and asked what it was. At that moment, he saw many terrible heads of the monster, which looked like snakes, and, sticking out their long tongue, looked at him. Ha-jun was shocked to think that it looked like he wouldn't have to worry about the lack of saliva, and Lucio thought he was crazy. Chiron walked along the ground, clattering his hooves and cursing, saying, "Fool, where did he go?" He thought that he was an ordinary person, and did not know that he was hiding such abilities, and yet he is just a person. Even with abilities, he cannot climb mountains. Suddenly, he saw that the ground in one place was broken, asking in shock, did he really go to the cave? Chiron lost his temper, shouting to go crazy. At that moment, a green light began to emanate from him. His eyes became crazy, and he jumped forward with all his strength, pushing off the ground, with the thought that he should not enter the cave, because there were immortal monsters there. Ha-jun stood in front of these monsters, crying and thinking horror. He quickly grabbed Lucio, who screamed, "What a disgusting monster!" Standing behind a large boulder, Ha-jun, looking out from behind it, said that it seemed like the monster was sleeping now, and Lucio asked him in shock how this was possible. She said a huge snake with several heads. This is a huge monster Hydra. Ha-jun asked in surprise, Hydra? She screamed, asking Ha-jun what did Chiron entrust to him. He answered her with a cry, but how should he know? He asked who knew that they would have to get the saliva of this monster. Looking ahead, Ha-jun thought he should have gotten caught like that. He thought that he could do something else with a Hades helmet, but he had to go without it. Suddenly, he saw a screen in front of him and asked in amazement, "What is this?" A prompt appeared on the screen in front of him, saying that in an emergency he could use the warp service. After reading this, Ha-jun asked the warp service in surprise. The screen said that for just 5,000 coins, they would transfer the goods he purchased to where he was now, and Ha-jun angrily shouted 50 million just for moving the goods. He bought the Hades helmet for 800 coins, but this is a blatant robbery. Quickly realizing that now was not the time to choose, he pointed at the screen and 5,000 coins were debited from his balance, leaving him with 188,700 coins. Lucio screamed at him that a helmet had just fallen from the sky. Ha-jun, crying, took it in his hands and said that this was his hard-earned 50 million. Putting on his helmet, he nervously said that Hydra is over. Ha-jun walked forward, and Lucio shouted, "What is he doing?" "The entrance is on the wrong side." Ha-jun said that he actually knows, and Lucio screamed, "Is he crazy?" "It's Hydra itself." She shouted that this is a huge monster, the daughter of Typhon. Even the gods of Olympus are afraid of the deadly poison of this monster. Ha-jun thought in surprise, so this is the monster's daughter. Pushing Lucio aside, he said it looks like this Typhon scattered his seed everywhere, and she, trying to free herself, screamed that now is not the time for jokes. She screamed with tears in her eyes that this time everything was different and not like with that Sphinx. Ha-jun confidently told her that he could handle it, telling her to go to the entrance for now. Lucio screamed his name, but he did not answer, and she shouted with all her might that he was a real fool. Let the deadly poison melt into the guests. After these words, she left, and Ha-jun, left alone, thought, well, she could have left gracefully, but in the end, she left only curses. He spoke like this now, and looking with frightened eyes at the monster, he confidently said that it was time to start making the delivery. Taking the jar, Ha-jung headed forward, straight to the mouth of the Hydra. He said that he could sleep normally, but it was decided by his eyes, completely intimidating him. Having opened the jar, he brought it to his mouth, saying ugh. He thinks it's better not to touch this, otherwise something terrible will happen. Ha-jung thought about why he was told to get it. When he finished, he said okay. He hopes this is enough for him. Just let Chiron try to give him a small tip for the delivery. Suddenly, he felt shaking and asked in shock what was happening. Is the ceiling collapsing? He screamed in horror. There was dust everywhere, and he wondered if it was an earthquake. To his horror, Ha-jun noticed that his jar had broken. Screaming, oh no, he couldn't salivate without it. Ha-jun stood in front of Hydra and cursed loudly, then said no. She woke up. He was trying to remember that he was wearing a helmet and just needed to not show that he was there, when suddenly he heard a voice asking who he was. The voice spoke the smell of the ghosts of hell with flayed skin, asking him sent from the abyss. Ha-jun, eyes wide open, worriedly thought, did she smell him? Hydra laughingly said that you shouldn't be so afraid of him. This wonderful helmet that covers him belongs to Hades, right? Ha-jun realized that this was seeing right through him, after which Hydra asked him why he came. Even so far away, having swum across the river Styx, Ha-jung, trembling madly with fear, thought that he had come for saliva, but if he said so, it would immediately kill him. One of the heads asked, is it possible to swim across the river Styx? The other head replied that Hades sent him, asking what? Did she want to die? Heads began to quarrel. Suddenly, Hydra again asked Ha-jun why he was hesitating. Hydra said that she hoped he didn't wake him up because of some nonsense. Because if that's the case, but before the head could finish speaking, Ha-jun said that he came to say hello from the abyss. With these words, he took off his helmet, thinking he was in a dead end. Hydra asked in surprise, hello? Thinking about it, she said it like that. Was it sent by Chiron? Ha-jun answered yes, exactly, saying that it seems like he can't get in touch with this lately. So he asked to say hello, and Hydra replied, right, this little guy is interested in how his older sister is doing. She has lived for so many millennia, but for the first time sees this. Ha-jun looked ahead in shock. In front of him was a woman with dark hair and a long black dress who asked him how he was doing. Is he okay as a guard? Ha-jun thought big sister in shock. Lucio flew in the vastness of the snow-capped mountains, crying. She thought that Ha-jun is such a fool. Even he can't cope with Hydra. This is suicide. She decided that she should go down and ask for help. With this thought, she flew down and suddenly ran into Chiron, who asked her, what is it? Why is she only alone? She shouted to him that Ha-jun had now gone to Hydra, and Chiron, putting his hand on his face, thoughtfully said, it means he finally got to Hydra. Lucio screamed that she needed to quickly help Ha-jung, and Chiron said that even he, a demigod, could not cope with Hydra. Lucio exclaimed it couldn't be. I had to send him back. At this time, Chiron, looking at her, exhaled and, again glowing green, told her to show the way. Lucio asked Chiron in shock. He told her that he could not allow the young guy to die for him. Ha-jun was in a cave. Hydra stood in front of Ha-jun, and he said in surprise Hydra in the form of a man. She said that he seemed surprised to see her. After she was sealed here, she can no longer return to her true form. Even her brother has not seen her like this, so he does not know. Ha-jun thought little brother. Is she talking about Cerberus? He wondered in surprise. What about their genealogy? Hydra spoke specifically, asking how her younger brother was doing. She said that she couldn't contact him, so she was very worried, and Ha-jun shouted, why the extra words? He said that he eats 3 times a day and gets paid, so he is very happy with his profession. He himself added to himself as a pet, and Hydra, covering her mouth with her hand, asked, really? She said that she was glad to hear this, and Ha-jun said that since he said hello, it was time for him to go, thinking that if he stayed here, he might be caught lying. After that, Hydra spoke for a minute. Ha-jung was surprised, and she turned to him and said, since he came at her brother's request, can't she just let him go? What will happen to her reputation? Ha-jun realized that he couldn't move and asked by reputation. He said, well, What kind of reputation is she? Suddenly, Hydra's eyes turned red. She stuck out her long tongue and told him not to refuse, ordering him to take it. She turned her back to him, where the drawing was, and said in the middle of her back, "There are scales that are different in color. He can pull it out and take it for himself." Ha-jun thought in shock. Is she suddenly asking him to rip out her scales? Hydra told him not to be afraid. Its scales contained dangerous power that would be useful to him. Ha-jun thought, if so, is it really some kind of object like Son Goku's tail? Delighted, he thought that then he had no reason to refuse, saying, well, nothing can be done, and laughing, he extended his hands to the Hydra's back. Trying to pull out the scales, he thought why couldn't he pull it out? Suddenly, he thought, did she do this on purpose? At that moment, the riding suit activated. Ha-jun realized that he was able to pull it out and suddenly, tiredly, fell to the ground. There was dust all around. He said how slippery it was, saying it worked. There was a piece of scales in his hands, and he shouted, he succeeded, Hydra! She smiled at him, saying well done, but asked him if he was too greedy. She said, I really didn't think that he had his eyes on her, saying, but let him do as he wants. Hydra lay down on the ground, and Ha-jun shouted that this was some kind of misunderstanding. Suddenly, Chiron appeared next to him, who sighed and said that he couldn't believe it. Ha-jun turned around in surprise, and seeing him, asked what? Chiron, looking at him, asked stunned, did he defeat the Hydra itself? Ha-young stood engulfed in blue flames. Next to him, Hydra was lying on the ground and crying. This is how it looked from Chiron. Ha-young asked him what he was doing here. Lucio, who was sitting on Chiron's shoulder, suddenly shouted to Ha-jun, how glad it is that he is alive. He looked at her in surprise, saying that it was dangerous here, and he told her to wait outside. Lucio screamed back, but he didn't listen to her either. Ha-young told her with a smile that she was still faithful, shaking her, and she screamed that she was in pain. Chiron stood at a distance, looking at them and thinking, did man really defeat Hydra? Even Hercules found it difficult to cope with her, thinking that Hephaestus had sent a real monster. Ha-jun was fooling around with Lucio when he suddenly noticed that Hydra was looking at him and apologized to her, saying they were too noisy, right? She said nothing, asking him, by the way, is this his nymph? He asked, what does it mean? He said that it was just a girl from a neighboring house. Lucio screamed that someone like her was considered among the nymphs herself, but before she could speak, Ha-jun covered her mouth with his hand. Hydra, the girl from the neighboring house said dreamily. She said how unusually, suddenly, her eyes turned very red, and she said also, long time no see, turning to Chiron. She told him that he had grown old, asking whether time really does not spare even immortals. After that she added, or did her poison affect him? Ha-jun, holding Lucio in his hands, repeated the poison, asking in surprise what happened between them. Lucio said that she was no longer even surprised at his ignorance, asking what he wants to get. She told him that this is already a well-known story, Hercules, the poisoned arrow of Hydra, and also the death of Chiron. It was an accident. Then, the centaurs lay on the ground, defeated. Chiron lay among them, and took an arrow from his knee. No, it was more like retribution for raising a monster. Chiron was sitting in a huge room of the castle in front of a man sitting on a throne. The man turned to him, asking the sage Chiron, is he asking him to take away the immortality that he gave him? He said that he was asking him about this, calling the man Zeus, and said that he could no longer endure this torment. Zeus, listening to him, said okay, considering that he raised so many heroes, he will give him a constellation. And Chiron shouted, what is he talking about? Zeus told him that he could not die and would understand later. And Chiron, in despair, shouted but Zeus. Thus ended his life as a sage, and he became the deity who ruled the constellation Sagittarius. He became the constellation Chiron. This Hydra poison kills all living things. She said that he is also infected with this poison, but he was able to get to this place. For sure he is holding on thanks to the power of the constellation. Chiron angrily said that she still had the same nasty snake tongue, asking if she wanted him to cut it off. Hydra laughed, repeating his words and saying that he used to be such a gentle man. Turning to Ha-jun, she asked, I think his name is Ha-jun? He answered yes, that's right, looking at the girl, and Lucio suddenly screamed, covering his eyes with her hands so that he would not look at her. She screamed, does he want age restrictions to be imposed on him? Hydra, looking at them, asked him did he need her saliva at Chiron's request? Looking at her in surprise, Ha-jun asked her so she knew everything from the very beginning. Hydra replied that it smelled like Chiron, and having collected saliva in a flask, she handed it to Chiron, telling him to take it. He cried out excitedly. What was she up to? She couldn't just give him the antidote. Hydra said that he took her for some kind of villain, adding that, in fact, it was not she who poisoned him, but Hercules, asking, isn't that right? Ha-jun cried out in shock. Hercules, is this student Chiron? Hydra, holding the flask in her hand, said, but all this time she was waiting for him to come for the antidote. They looked at each other and Chiron, taking the antidote, quickly drank it. Suddenly, he coughed. His body glowed purple and the bandage on his leg came undone. Everyone looked at this in surprise. Chiron fell to the ground and Hydra stood in front of him, looking at him. Ha-jun, turning to her, asked her in surprise if it was really her, but did not have time to finish. Hearing the whimpering of Chiron, who said that his legs had returned to their previous state. 3D8 or 90, all this time he endured pain in the world of constellations. Finally, he can put an end to this torment. Hydra, touching him, said that he had to endure a lot. His torment lasted for an eternity. Ha-jun ran up to him, shouting Chiron. Later, they were in his house. Ha-jun sat with Lucio on the floor, saying why he still doesn't come out. He said he hoped he wouldn't withhold the delivery fee and Lucio yelled what the hell was he talking about. How he speaks disparagingly of Chiron. She said that if you think about it, it was Hydra who gave him the antidote, so he cannot claim payment for the delivery. Ha-jun just exhaled in frustration, and at that moment Chiron entered the room. He apologized to them, asking how long they had waited. He was very pleased and said that he was looking for something, so he lingered. Chiron held a bow in his hand and laughed good-naturedly. Ha-jun said that it was longer than he thought, and Lucio, covering his mouth, said that they didn't wait a bit. Ha-jun asked him did he talk about onions? Chiron answered exactly, although he was going to give it to Hercules, but he thinks that it would suit him better. Ha-jun, looking upset at this, thought that it would be better if he gave him money. He said out loud that, be that as it may, he would accept the bow with gratitude, when suddenly an unknown person appeared in the doorway. Chiron shouted to him who he was. Ha-jun could not understand who it was. The man apologized to them for coming to them so suddenly. Lucio said the same in shock, but she was interrupted by the man, who said that he would tell him in detail later. He was wearing heavy armor and holding a huge sword. Lucio shouted in shock, is this the god of war, Ares? Ha-jun said thoughtfully, Ares, the fool from Olympus. Lucio, hearing this, screamed, is he crazy? Ares is the son of Zeus and Hera, that is, a prince among the gods. Suddenly, he said to the man and the nymph, is he Ha-jun? He embarrassedly said yes, actually, and Ares, saying that he had found him, pushed off the floor and as fast as he could and ran towards him. Ha-jun screamed, thinking what was going on. At that moment, Ares, not having reached him, fell on his knees in front of him, begging him to help him. Ha-jun stood in shock, thinking that he, 27 years old, was the first among people to whom God knelt.